Marcus Brown's heart raced as he sat in the crowded lecture hall, staring at the chalkboard with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. The professor, Dr. Jeffrey Stone, was mid-lecture, explaining a particularly complex math theory, the kind that made Marcus's head spin. He had spent weeks preparing for this day, trying to prove to everyone, especially himself, that he was capable of excelling in a field that many believed he was too dumb for. Marcus wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't supposed to be the guy sitting in a lecture hall at the prestigious Math and Science building, surrounded by students whose polished resumes and Ivy League backgrounds made them seem like they had it all figured out. But here he was. He wasn't a traditional student. He didn't come from a family of academics, and the path he had taken to get to this point had been far from easy. Growing up in a rough neighborhood on the outskirts of Detroit, Marcus had faced adversity in almost every form. His father had left when he was just a child, and his mother, a strong but worn woman, worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. She believed in him, always had, but the world outside didn't always share her optimism. At first, it wasn't even math that caught his interest. It was the way numbers could make sense of the chaos around him, the way equations felt like they had answers, unlike the uncertain world he lived in. But when he started taking math seriously, he encountered resistance, not from his family, but from the academic world that told him time and time again he didn't belong. Marcus, his high school math teacher had said once, maybe you should consider something a little more practical. Not everyone is cut out for this kind of work. That stung, but it didn't deter him. If anything, it lit a fire inside him. If there was one thing Marcus knew, it was that he wasn't going to let anyone define what he could or couldn't do. Let's get back to the proof, Dr. Stone's voice broke through Marcus's thoughts, pulling his focus back to the chalkboard. The professor was explaining an advanced theorem, his voice dripping with authority. As Dr. Stone went through the steps, Marcus's stomach twisted. Something didn't feel right. The equation seemed off, there was a mistake somewhere, buried in the details. His eyes narrowed as he analyzed the math, trying to pinpoint exactly where the professor had gone wrong. Marcus shifted in his seat, his heart pounding. He knew what was at stake. This wasn't just about correcting a simple mistake in front of a class. This was a chance to prove something bigger, something he had been fighting for his entire life. But should he speak up? Would it be seen as arrogance? Or worse, a sign that he didn't belong? Marcus, a voice from behind him whispered. You're going to let him get away with this? You know he's wrong. Marcus turned to see his classmate, David, staring at him, his eyebrows raised in disbelief. David was one of those students who had always seemed to glide through school, never struggling, always confident. He was popular, well-liked, and often the first to offer an opinion in class. Marcus's hands started to sweat. He could feel the pressure building, the weight of everyone's expectations pressing down on him. He'd been called too dumb for math more times than he could count. And now, here was his chance to shut all of that down. Dr. Stone turned toward the board, chalk in hand, oblivious to Marcus's inner turmoil. The professor wrote out the final part of the proof, but something still didn't sit right. Marcus couldn't let it go. Taking a deep breath, he raised his hand. The room fell silent. Dr. Stone paused, turning to look at Marcus with a mixture of surprise and annoyance. Yes, Marcus, he said, his tone less than encouraging. I think you've made a mistake in the 3rd step, Marcus said, his voice shaking, but determined. It's not factoring in the negative root properly. A few students in the room glanced at each other, a few of them smirking. Marcus could feel their eyes on him, judging, waiting for him to trip up. This wasn't just any lecture, it was a live demonstration in front of dozens of students, and the pressure was unbearable. Dr. Stone narrowed his eyes, clearly irritated by the interruption. He took a slow step toward the chalkboard, studying the equation for a moment before responding. Marcus, he said, his voice laced with condescension. I don't think you fully understand the problem here. This proof is standard, nothing complicated. Perhaps math isn't the right field for you after all. You should try something else. Something a little less demanding. The words hit Marcus like a slap to the face. He could feel the blood rushing to his ears, the heat of embarrassment creeping up his neck. He had expected a challenge, but this was a direct dismissal. A few students chuckled softly behind him, and Marcus's stomach churned. He could feel the weight of their judgments, the collective gaze of the class turning toward him. But something inside him snapped. He wasn't going to let this professor's arrogance define him. Not now, not ever. "I'm sorry, but I'm pretty sure you missed something," Marcus said, his voice gaining strength. "The equation you've written here doesn't account for the negative root. It's not the right solution." Dr. Stone scoffed and shook his head, clearly frustrated. "Marcus, you're welcome to come talk to me after class, but I suggest you focus on understanding the basics first." The class buzzed with tension. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest, but he refused to back down. He wasn't just doing this to prove Dr. Stone wrong, he was doing it for himself. "I think we should check it," Marcus said, his tone firm but respectful. Dr. Stone's expression darkened. "You're wasting my time." Before the professor could dismiss him again, Marcus walked up to the board. With shaking hands, he corrected the mistake, step by step, showing the class where the professor had gone wrong. As he went through the solution, the murmurs in the room grew louder, and a few students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. When Marcus finished, the silence in the room was deafening. Dr. Stone stared at the board, his face turning red with frustration. For a long moment, there was no sound, no acknowledgement, just a standoff between the two. Finally, Dr. Stone spoke, but his voice was softer now. "I see. Well, I stand corrected." His eyes flickered over to Marcus, though there was no apology in his tone. "That's an interesting approach." Marcus nodded, his heart still racing, but a sense of pride washed over him. It wasn't the apology he had hoped for, but it didn't matter. He had stood up for himself in a room full of people who had doubted him, and for the first time in his life, it felt like the world had taken notice. As Marcus made his way back to his seat, he felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. And maybe, just maybe, he wasn't too dumb for math after all. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Marcus sat in the same lecture hall the next week, still feeling the lingering effects of the moment when he'd corrected Dr. Stone. Despite the minor victory, he couldn't shake the weight of the past, a past that was always there, lurking just beneath the surface. It wasn't just a lecture hall filled with students, it was another test, another opportunity to prove that he had the right to be there. He leaned back in his chair, the familiar hum of the classroom around him fading as he began to think back to the place where his journey had started. Marcus was born in Detroit, Michigan, in a neighborhood where hope was often in short supply. His father, a mechanic by trade, had left when Marcus was just 5 years old, leaving his mother to shoulder the responsibilities of raising 2 children. His older brother, David, had been the strong one, the protector. David was the kind of person who knew how to fix things, whether it was the car in the driveway or the broken promise of a better future that their father had left behind. Marcus, on the other hand, had always been different. He was the quiet one, the dreamer, spending hours hunched over old math books he found in the back of a second-hand store. At first, math had been nothing more than a distraction, a way to escape the chaos of their neighborhood. The numbers were orderly, predictable, unlike the world around him. But as he grew older, Marcus realized that math was more than just a coping mechanism. It was a language, a way to understand the universe in a way that nothing else could. "I don't know why you're wasting your time with all this fancy stuff," David had once said when he caught Marcus reading a book on algebra at the kitchen table. "This stuff won't help you make a living. You need to learn how to get your hands dirty, like I do." But Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to life. He didn't want to be stuck in the same cycle, working paycheck to paycheck, struggling to make ends meet. He dreamed of going to college, of studying something that could take him beyond the limits of his world. And despite the obstacles, despite the fact that the odds were stacked against him, he never stopped dreaming. It wasn't easy. College applications were expensive, and even with his best grades in high school, Marcus didn't have the connections or the money to compete with other students from wealthier backgrounds. But when he got his acceptance letter to a small community college, his heart soared. He had done it. He was going to take the first step toward his future. His mother, a woman who had sacrificed so much for her children, was his biggest cheerleader. "Marcus," she said one evening, after he'd gotten the letter, "you're going to make something of yourself. You just have to keep going. Don't let anyone tell you that you can't." She didn't have much to offer beyond love and encouragement, but that was enough. Her belief in him was the spark that fueled his journey. And David? Well, David wasn't so sure. "I don't get it, man," he had said with a shake of his head. "You're smart, I'll give you that. But all this school stuff, what's it really going to get you? You'll be stuck with more bills, more problems. There's no quick fix in that." It was hard to argue with David. Their life had been full of hardship, and the idea of making it out seemed almost impossible. But Marcus didn't care. He had a vision, and he wasn't about to let it slip away. As he sat in the lecture hall now, surrounded by students who had no idea about his past, Marcus couldn't help but feel a deep sense of isolation. Most of his classmates came from families that had the resources to give them the best education money could buy. Some had private tutors. Some had parents who were professors themselves. Marcus? He had a single mother who worked 2 jobs and a brother who didn't understand his dream. Yet, it was in this very environment, surrounded by students who were supposed to be his intellectual equals, that Marcus found himself questioning everything. His classmates were polite, but he could feel the unspoken judgment. He wasn't one of them. Not really. He was an outsider in this world, a world where people spoke a language he was still trying to master. A world that often didn't see him for who he was, just another black kid from the wrong side of town who didn't belong in spaces like these. Marcus adjusted his glasses, his fingers tapping nervously on the desk in front of him. He thought about the moment with Dr. Stone again. The sting of the professor's dismissal still lingered. Was he wrong to have corrected the mistake? Or had he just exposed himself to further ridicule? He couldn't stop thinking about it. But then, in the quiet corners of his mind, he heard his mother's voice echoing, "You can do this, Marcus. Don't let anyone tell you what you're capable of." That was the thing about Marcus. He couldn't ignore the voices that had shaped him. The voice of his mother, telling him that he was worth something. The voice of David, urging him to take a more practical path. But most importantly, the voice inside his own head, the one that had always whispered, "Keep going. You belong here." As the lecture continued, Marcus's mind wandered to a moment just a few months earlier when he had nearly given up on this entire journey. It had been his first semester at the community college, and things hadn't gone as smoothly as he had hoped. He had signed up for an advanced math class, eager to challenge himself, but quickly found that the course material was overwhelming. The lectures moved at a breakneck pace, and no matter how hard he studied, he couldn't seem to keep up. One evening, he sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by crumpled papers and textbooks, feeling the weight of his failure settle over him like a heavy blanket. "I don't know if I can do this," he had confessed to his mother, his voice shaking. "I've been trying, but it's just too much. Maybe I'm just not smart enough for this." His mother had set down the dish she was washing and looked at him with those warm, understanding eyes. "Marcus," she said softly, "no one is born knowing everything. You're going to face obstacles. But you can't let those obstacles define you. I don't care how many times you fall, as long as you get back up." And just like that, he found the strength to keep going. He was determined to prove to himself, and to everyone who doubted him, that he could succeed. As the lecture continued, Marcus's gaze drifted to the clock at the back of the room. The professor was nearing the end of the lesson, and Marcus's mind was still buzzing. He knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going to let this challenge define him. He would prove that no matter where you came from, no matter what people said about you, you could achieve greatness if you were willing to fight for it. He had a long road ahead, but Marcus was starting to understand that this journey wasn't just about math, it was about resilience, about proving that his background didn't dictate his future. And with every step he took, he was one step closer to the dream he had always carried in his heart. The days after the lecture with Dr. Stone passed in a blur of anxiety and quiet triumph. Marcus couldn't stop thinking about that moment, when his voice had broken through the authority of the professor, correcting him in front of the entire class. But as the excitement of that small victory faded, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over yet. It was as if the universe had tossed him a bone, and now it was waiting to see if he could take the next leap. He had come to college to prove something to himself, and now, more than ever, he felt like there was so much more to prove to everyone else. He wasn't naive enough to think that one successful correction would suddenly erase the doubts and judgments that had been ingrained in him for years. There were still barriers, obstacles, and a long road ahead. But for the first time, Marcus felt like he had the strength to take them on. It wasn't just the academic world that felt like a constant test. It was life, the very fabric of his existence that had always been one struggle after another. Growing up in a neighborhood where you had to fight for every inch, where every success felt like a fleeting dream, had shaped him into someone who couldn't afford to let up. He knew the cost of failure. He had seen it in the faces of his friends who had been swallowed up by the streets, or worse, lost to the cycle of poverty. But his biggest conflict wasn't even the world around him, it was the struggle within himself. Every day, he woke up wondering if he really belonged here, in this prestigious university, surrounded by people who seemed to glide through life effortlessly. He was still haunted by the words of his high school teacher: "Maybe you should consider something a little more practical." He had carried those words like a scar. They weren't just a teacher's words, they were the words of a world that didn't believe someone like him could ever succeed. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when Marcus found himself at the university's library, searching for a quiet corner to study. It had been one of those days where everything felt heavy, and the pressure from both inside and outside was starting to weigh him down. Dr. Stone's lecture had stirred something in him, but now there was the added stress of midterms approaching, and his friends from home had started texting him about his future plans, reminding him of the sacrifices his mother had made to get him to this point. He set his backpack down at a table by the window, the rain tapping against the glass like a soft reminder that time was passing. His hands hovered over the open textbook in front of him, the pages filled with dense equations that seemed to mock him with their complexity. He had been studying for hours, but the math wasn't making sense anymore. His mind kept wandering back to Dr. Stone's words, to the way the professor had dismissed him, almost as if he expected Marcus to fail. "Maybe I'm just not cut out for this," he muttered under his breath, the familiar self-doubt creeping back in. He glanced up from his textbook and saw a figure approaching from the corner of his eye. It was David, his older brother. David didn't come to visit often, he had his own life, his own world. But Marcus knew why David was here. "Hey, little bro," David said, his voice a little too casual, as if he was trying to hide something. "Mind if I join you for a minute?" Marcus gave a quick nod, feeling the weight of the conversation coming. He had always admired David, but the older brother's approach to life was so different from his own. While Marcus was striving for a degree, working tirelessly to make it out of Detroit and into a better future, David had settled into the rhythm of the streets, the blue-collar world where education didn't matter as much as who you knew and how you could get by. David dropped his bag onto the table and sat across from Marcus, his eyes scanning the textbooks and notebooks in front of him. "Still hitting the books hard, huh? You know, you've got to slow down sometimes. Not everything in life is about textbooks." Marcus frowned, closing the book in front of him. "It's not about the books, Dave. It's about proving that I belong here. This place," he gestured around the library, his frustration rising. "It's nothing like back home. No one here thinks I belong." David raised an eyebrow. "You're not back home anymore. Don't let their judgment mess with your head. You know how it goes." Marcus leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "It's not just their judgment. It's mine too. Sometimes I think they're right. Maybe I'm not cut out for this. Maybe I should have listened when they told me math wasn't for me." David sighed, leaning forward. "You've always had that self-doubt. When we were kids, you never thought you could make it out. But look at you now. You're here. But listen to me, Marcus. This college stuff, it's not the end-all, be-all. You've got to think about what's going to make you happy in the long run. You know, that's what matters in the end." "Maybe," Marcus said slowly, feeling a knot in his stomach. "But what about all the sacrifices Mom made? She worked herself to the bone for us to get here. I can't throw that away. I can't throw away the dream of something better. Not for me, and not for her." David looked at him, his expression softening. "I get it. I do. But I also know that you're fighting battles on all sides, against the people who don't believe in you and the ones who want to see you fail. It's exhausting. You don't need that." The two brothers sat in silence for a moment. Marcus knew his brother loved him, but David had always been about taking the easy route, the path that avoided confrontation, the one that didn't lead to complicated dreams. He didn't understand Marcus's need to push through. To prove that his background didn't define him, that his future didn't have to be mapped out by the same limitations his father had faced. But Marcus wasn't sure anymore. Maybe David was right. Maybe this whole pursuit was futile. The math, the struggle, the relentless fight to prove that he belonged. Maybe it wasn't worth it. Just then, as if the universe had decided to intervene, Marcus's phone buzzed on the table, interrupting his thoughts. It was a text message from someone he hadn't expected to hear from. It was Dr. Stone. "Marcus," the text began. "I've been thinking about our conversation the other day. I may have misjudged your correction in class. I'd like to meet after office hours to discuss your thoughts further. Your approach was unorthodox, but I think there's more here than I initially realized. See you at 3 p.m. tomorrow." Marcus stared at the phone for a moment, his breath catching in his chest. This was unexpected, especially coming from someone like Dr. Stone, who had dismissed him so easily before. David leaned over, peering at the screen. "What's that?" The professor finally came to his senses. Marcus nodded slowly, unsure of what to make of it. Maybe. It was a small victory, one that felt like a crack in the wall that had been built around him. But the victory wasn't just in the professor's change of heart. It was in the realization that the world, no matter how much it tried to push him down, wasn't ready to give up on him yet. The sun was low in the sky when Marcus walked to Dr. Stone's office the next day. His mind was racing. The text from Dr. Stone had shaken him. He hadn't expected the professor to reach out, let alone ask for a meeting to discuss the correction in front of the class. For a brief moment, Marcus wondered if this was some sort of trap. Was Dr. Stone going to expose him as a fraud, call out his arrogance for daring to challenge him? Or was there something else at play here, something bigger? Marcus's footsteps echoed down the long hallway of the academic building. The walls were lined with plaques honoring former professors, the rich history of the university surrounding him at every turn. It was hard to ignore the feeling of being a stranger in this place, like an outsider trying to fit into a world that wasn't designed for him. He'd been here for a few months now, but that sense of not belonging still clung to him. When Marcus reached the door to Dr. Stone's office, he took a deep breath before knocking. The sharp rap on the door made him feel even more uncertain, as though his entire future might hinge on the conversation that was about to take place. "Come in," Dr. Stone's voice called out from the other side. Marcus pushed the door open, stepping into the professor's cluttered office. Books were piled high on shelves, papers scattered across the desk, and a faint smell of coffee hung in the air. Dr. Stone, a middle-aged man with graying hair and glasses perched on the tip of his nose, looked up from his computer as Marcus entered. "Ah, Marcus," Dr. Stone said, his tone slightly warmer than it had been in class. "I'm glad you could make it." Marcus nodded, trying to hide his nerves. "Thanks for reaching out, Professor. I wasn't sure what to expect." Dr. Stone motioned to the chair in front of his desk. "Please, have a seat. I've been thinking about what happened the other day. I'll be honest, I wasn't expecting you to correct me in front of the class, but I've had time to reflect, and you made a valid point." Marcus sat down, unsure of how to respond. Dr. Stone's words were unexpected, and for a moment, Marcus simply stared at the professor, trying to process what this meant. "I've been teaching for a long time," Dr. Stone continued, leaning back in his chair. "And sometimes, in the midst of lecturing, you don't see the full picture. I thought I was right, but you caught the mistake. And, quite frankly, it's not often that I see students, especially freshmen, step up like that." Marcus felt his heart beat faster. Could this be happening? Was Dr. Stone actually acknowledging his effort, or was this some form of backhanded compliment? "You know," Dr. Stone said, "I've been in this field for years. I've seen brilliant students, ones who could have gone anywhere, but I've also seen many fall through the cracks because they didn't have the confidence to speak up. The confidence to say, 'I know I'm right, and I'm going to fight for it.'" He paused, watching Marcus carefully. "That's why I wanted to meet with you." For the first time in the conversation, Marcus's nerves eased just a little. "You're saying I did the right thing?" Dr. Stone smiled. "Absolutely. But there's more to it than just that. The real question is, why did you feel the need to correct me? What made you so sure?" Marcus shifted in his chair, the weight of the question settling in. "Well, I've been working with math for a long time. It's something I'm passionate about. And when you made the mistake, I just knew the right answer. I couldn't let it go." Dr. Stone nodded, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "That's good. Passion is important. But I'm not going to lie to you, Marcus. You're not going to get far if you rely solely on passion. Passion gets you in the door, but it's discipline and dedication that will carry you to the top. And in this field, as you already know, that can be a long climb." Marcus felt a knot form in his stomach. "I get that, Professor. But what if the climb is too steep? What if I'm not cut out for it? I'm just a guy from Detroit, nothing special. People like me don't make it in these places." Dr. Stone's expression softened. "Listen, I won't lie to you. This field can be grueling. It demands a lot from you, time, energy, and sometimes even your sense of self. But I've seen students like you, students who doubt themselves, who think they don't belong. And let me tell you, Marcus, the only thing standing between you and success is your own belief that you can't do it." Marcus swallowed, feeling a sense of disbelief. Could this really be happening? Could this be the moment he had been waiting for, the moment when someone in authority finally told him he was worthy, told him he was capable of more than he had ever believed? "You've got something special," Dr. Stone continued, his voice firm now. "It's not just the knowledge you bring. It's the way you approach problems, the way you think. And that's rare. So, don't let doubt or anyone else's limitations define you. You've got the potential to go far, if you're willing to put in the work. But that's up to you." The professor's words hit Marcus like a jolt of electricity, sparking something inside him that he hadn't even realized was there. A part of him had always feared that he wasn't enough, that he couldn't rise above the expectations others had set for him. But here was someone who had been in the field for years, telling him that he had what it took. That he was more than just a statistic, more than just another student from a poor neighborhood. He was Marcus, a person capable of greatness. "Thank you," Marcus said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. I needed to hear that. Dr. Stone stood up and extended his hand. I meant it. I see something in you, Marcus. Don't waste it. As Marcus shook the professor's hand, a sense of clarity washed over him. He had spent so long questioning his place in the world, questioning whether he was good enough. But in that moment, he realized something. The only person who could stop him was himself. The next few days were a whirlwind. Marcus buried himself in his studies with a new sense of purpose. He wasn't just trying to get by anymore, he was determined to thrive. Each equation felt like a step forward, each concept a building block toward his future. But even as his grades began to improve, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle wasn't with the math or the classes, it was with himself. The voice of doubt still whispered in the back of his mind, and his insecurities often crept in at the most unexpected times. One evening, as he sat in the dorm room staring at a problem set, his phone buzzed. It was a message from David. How's the studying going, bro? You're gonna crush it, right? Marcus paused for a moment, staring at the message. His brother had always been his anchor, someone who had always been there, even if they didn't always see eye to eye. But for the first time, Marcus wondered if David truly understood the journey he was on. Marcus typed a quick reply. Trying to. Just a lot on my mind. David's reply came almost immediately. You've got this, man. Just don't lose sight of the big picture. Remember why you're doing this. Marcus smiled, feeling a surge of gratitude. He knew his brother meant well, even if their paths in life had been so different. And for the first time in a long time, Marcus believed him. He wasn't just fighting for a degree. He was fighting for his future. And no matter how steep the climb, he was determined to reach the top. The weeks after his meeting with Dr. Stone were a blur of late nights, countless hours of studying, and conversations with his friends, both new and old. Marcus had shifted into a higher gear, and it wasn't just about passing anymore, it was about mastering his craft. Every challenge he faced felt like a test, but it wasn't just about the math. It was about overcoming the deep-seated doubts and fears that had held him back for years. He was no longer just a student from Detroit, he was becoming someone who belonged here. His confidence grew as his grades improved. He started participating more in class discussions, his hand shooting up in response to questions, offering insights that were both sharp and well-reasoned. He felt more comfortable challenging his classmates when they made mistakes and, most importantly, he started trusting his own voice. For the first time in his life, Marcus felt like he wasn't just an outsider. He was part of something bigger. But with this newfound confidence came something else, the realization that he was being watched. Dr. Stone, who had been so dismissive at the start of the semester, was now taking notice of him in a different way. He was pushing Marcus harder in class, challenging him with more complex problems and ideas. And though it was intimidating, Marcus could feel the respect building between them. It was no longer a battle between student and teacher, it was more like a collaboration, a shared journey toward understanding. One afternoon, Marcus sat in a crowded cafe on campus, his laptop open in front of him as he worked through an advanced calculus problem. The cafe was bustling with students, the sounds of clinking coffee cups and murmurs of conversation filling the air. But Marcus's focus was sharp, his mind consumed by the numbers in front of him. He was almost at the answer when a voice broke through his concentration. Marcus, right? Marcus looked up and saw a tall, athletic-looking student standing by his table. The guy had a friendly smile, his hair neatly styled, and he was wearing a Georgetown sweatshirt. Marcus didn't recognize him at first, but then the student sat down across from him. Yeah. Marcus said, feeling a bit thrown off. I'm Jordan. We're in the same calculus class, the student said, extending a hand. I saw you speak up in lecture last week. You were the guy who corrected Dr. Stone, right? Marcus nodded, unsure where this was going. Yeah, that was me. Jordan's smile widened. I thought that was impressive, man. You don't see many people challenge him like that, especially in front of the whole class. I mean, most people would just sit there, too intimidated to say anything. You've got guts. Marcus felt a little uncomfortable at the attention. Thanks, I guess. It was just one mistake. Nothing to get all worked up about. Jordan shook his head. No, I'm serious. I've been in this class for a while, and I've never seen anyone do that. You've got something, don't let that confidence slip. Marcus wasn't sure how to respond. Part of him wanted to shrug it off, but there was something in Jordan's tone that made him take the compliment more seriously. It wasn't just praise, it was acknowledgement. For someone like Marcus, that recognition felt like a validation of everything he had been working for. Jordan leaned back in his chair. So, listen. I was actually wondering if you wanted to join me and some of the guys for a study session this weekend. We're trying to prep for the next exam, and I think you'd be a great addition. Marcus hesitated. He wasn't sure if he wanted to put himself out there, he wasn't used to being invited into those kinds of social circles. But there was something about the invitation that felt genuine, like Jordan wasn't just trying to get ahead but was actually interested in collaborating. Yeah, sure. I could use some help, Marcus said, finally nodding. Great. I'll send you the details. We're meeting at my place on Saturday afternoon. Should be a solid session. Plus, it'll be nice to have someone else who isn't afraid to speak up when we're stuck on a problem, Jordan said, standing up and patting Marcus on the back. As Jordan walked away, Marcus felt a strange mix of excitement and uncertainty. This was new ground for him. In his old life, people like Jordan were the ones who ran in different circles, the ones who didn't even acknowledge him unless they needed something. But here, on this campus, things were different. For the first time, Marcus felt like he was beginning to break into those circles, like he was no longer the outsider. That Saturday afternoon, Marcus showed up at Jordan's apartment, nervous but determined. The group of students had already gathered around a large dining table, their textbooks and laptops spread out in front of them. Marcus could feel the subtle shift in energy as they looked at him, unsure whether he was just another student or someone worth taking seriously. Jordan gave him a nod as he entered, his warm smile helping Marcus relax a bit. Glad you could make it. Jordan said as Marcus took a seat at the table. We're just starting with a few of the practice problems from the review sheet. The group got to work, their voices filling the space as they discussed the problems. Marcus listened carefully at first, observing how the others worked through their calculations. He noticed that some of them seemed more confident than others, but they still struggled with certain concepts. It was then that Marcus felt the spark of recognition. He wasn't just here to solve problems, he was here to help. The first few problems were simple enough, and Marcus kept quiet, allowing the others to handle them. But as the session progressed, one of the problems stumped them, a complex integral that seemed to defy all attempts at a solution. The group fell into a silence, everyone staring at the page in confusion. Without thinking, Marcus spoke up. I think I see where we're going wrong. We're missing a step. If we go back to the substitution method, we can simplify it, he said, his voice steady but confident. The room fell silent. Jordan looked up, surprised. You sure about that? Marcus nodded. Yeah, I've worked through similar problems before. Let me show you. He picked up a pen and began working through the equation, explaining each step as he went. The group watched in silence, their eyes widening as Marcus completed the solution. Within minutes, the problem was solved. It was as if the cloud of confusion had lifted, and for the first time in the study session, everyone felt a sense of clarity. That's amazing, one of the students said. I didn't even think of that approach. Jordan looked at Marcus with a grin. Man, I knew you were the real deal. You're definitely going to be a huge asset to the group. Marcus felt a rush of pride, but it was tempered by a deeper realization. This wasn't just about proving himself to them. This was about proving it to himself. For the first time in a long time, Marcus wasn't just surviving in this world, he was thriving. He wasn't just a student anymore, he was becoming someone who belonged. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of equations and shared laughs, as Marcus felt a growing sense of connection with the others. For the first time, he wasn't just the outsider who had to fight for every inch of respect. He was part of the team, and for once, that felt like enough. As he left Jordan's apartment that evening, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted inside him. He had come a long way from the student who feared that he wasn't good enough. Now, he was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, he had everything it took to succeed. The next few weeks were a blur for Marcus. The end of the semester loomed, and with it, the pressure of finals. He found himself buried under piles of notes, textbooks, and practice problems, trying to keep up with his studies while also managing the growing expectations placed on him. He had already earned the respect of his peers in the study group, but now, it was time to prove himself in a way that was far more personal. His future, the future he had worked so hard to carve out, was suddenly within his grasp, and it was terrifying. The weight of the pressure pressed down on Marcus every day. He spent hours at the library, his head buried in equations and proofs, his eyes tired from staring at the same set of numbers over and over again. Every new concept seemed to push him further, but the more he learned, the more he realized how much he still didn't know. It was easy to become discouraged when every new equation felt like an insurmountable mountain. But Marcus had come too far to let the fear of failure dictate his actions. His moments of doubt, while frequent, didn't last long. He had learned from the people who believed in him, particularly Dr. Stone. The professor's words about discipline and confidence echoed in his mind. Every time he felt like quitting, he would remember that conversation. He wasn't in this fight alone. One night, Marcus was at his usual spot in the library, his focus wavering as he worked through a set of integration problems. His phone buzzed on the table, and he glanced at it, surprised to see a text from David. "How's the studying going, bro? You're gonna crush it, right?" Marcus felt a pang of homesickness. He missed his brother's easy confidence, his way of always pushing him forward without any hesitation. Marcus quickly typed a reply. "Trying my best. It's a lot to handle, but I'll get through it." The reply came quickly. "Just remember why you're doing this. You got this, Marcus." His brother's words were simple, but they were enough to reignite that small flame of determination within him. With a deep breath, Marcus picked up his pen again and went back to the equations. As much as the weight of the future seemed daunting, he knew he couldn't afford to give up now. A few days later, Marcus found himself walking across campus to meet Dr. Stone once again. The professor had requested another meeting, and though Marcus had a pretty good idea of what it might be about, the nervous energy still simmered beneath his calm exterior. His mind kept replaying the conversations they'd had earlier in the semester, and he couldn't help but wonder if Dr. Stone had some new advice for him, something to help him push through the final stretch of the semester. Marcus knocked on Dr. Stone's door, and after a moment, the professor called him in. "Marcus," Dr. Stone greeted him, looking up from a stack of papers. "Thanks for coming in." Marcus took a seat in front of the professor's desk, trying not to show how much he was shaking inside. Dr. Stone's office, filled with books and papers, always felt a bit intimidating, like stepping into a world he could only dream of conquering. "I wanted to touch base with you before the exam," Dr. Stone said. "You've been doing well lately, and I've noticed your growth in class. But this exam is going to be the real test, how you handle the pressure, how well you've absorbed everything we've covered." Marcus nodded, taking a deep breath. "I'm ready. I've been studying a lot, and I feel more confident about the material." Dr. Stone studied him carefully. "Good. But I also want to make sure you're not just learning the material to get through the exam. You have the potential to do much more than just pass. I don't know if you realize it, but you're one of the brightest students in this class. Don't settle for just getting by. Push yourself. Keep challenging yourself." Marcus felt a rush of pride at the professor's words, but also a deep sense of fear. Was he really good enough for that kind of praise? Could he really do more than just get through this? I'm not saying this to pressure you, Dr. Stone continued. But I've been around long enough to see what people are capable of. And I believe you can go much further than you think. Marcus swallowed hard. I don't want to disappoint anyone, Professor. I've never been in a place like this before. I've always had to fight for every inch of respect, and I'm scared that it won't be enough. Dr. Stone leaned forward, his voice firm yet understanding. You're not alone in feeling that way. Everyone faces that fear, even the most successful people. The difference is how you handle it. You've already proven that you're capable of more than most people think. Don't let your fears hold you back. For a long moment, Marcus didn't speak. Dar. Stone's words rang in his ears, filling him with both hope and uncertainty. He had never really thought of himself as someone who could make it beyond just getting by. But hearing Dr. Stone say it so matter-of-factly made him wonder. Maybe there was more to him than he'd realized. You've got this, Marcus, Dr. Stone said, breaking the silence. I believe in you. Marcus stood up, feeling a mixture of gratitude and determination. Thanks, Professor. I won't let you down. As he walked out of Dr. Stone's office, the weight of the conversation stayed with him. There was no going back now. The pressure, while intense, was also the driving force behind his determination. Marcus knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was one he was willing to walk. The day of the exam arrived sooner than Marcus expected. The library had been a constant companion in the days leading up to it, and now, as he sat in the lecture hall, his heart was pounding. The exam was spread across several pages, each problem more complex than the last. Marcus took a deep breath and dove in, his hand moving across the page as the numbers and equations flowed effortlessly through his mind. As he worked through each problem, a sense of calm began to settle over him. The fear, the doubt, everything seemed to fade into the background as he focused on the task at hand. This was what he had been working for. He wasn't just solving problems, he was proving to himself that he belonged here. When he finally turned in his exam, Marcus felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He had done everything he could. Now, all that was left was to wait. Later that evening, Marcus received an unexpected message. It was from Jordan, the guy from his study group. Hey man, just wanted to say thanks again for helping out the other day. You really made a difference. I think we've got this. You've got this. The message was simple, but it reminded Marcus of how far he had come. He had found a group of people who respected him for who he was, not just his academic abilities. They saw something in him that he was just starting to see in himself. As Marcus sat back in his dorm room, his thoughts turned to the future. He wasn't sure what was coming next, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid. He had pushed through the hardest challenges, and he had made it this far. And now, all he could do was wait and see what the next chapter of his journey held. The day Marcus had been waiting for arrived with a quiet sense of dread. It wasn't the exam that bothered him anymore, it was the results. For the past few days, he had been replaying the test in his mind, wondering if he'd made any critical mistakes. The uncertainty gnawed at him. He could only hope that his hard work would pay off. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the email came. The subject line read, Final Exam Results, Mathematics 301, Advanced Calculus. Marcus stared at the notification on his phone, the weight of the moment sinking in. He hadn't checked his email all day, putting it off in hopes that his nerves would calm. But now, the moment was here. With a deep breath, he opened the email. Your final exam grade is now available, the email began, but Marcus barely processed the rest of the message. His eyes immediately searched for the grade. Grade A. A wave of relief swept over him so quickly, he had to read the result twice to make sure he wasn't seeing things. An A-. The grade he had always dreamed of getting, but never truly believed he could. His hands trembled slightly as he closed the email. The rush of emotion was overwhelming. This wasn't just about the grade, it was proof. Proof that all the hours of studying, all the late nights, all the doubts he had shoved down his throat, had been worth it. He wasn't just surviving at Georgetown anymore. He was thriving. That evening, he met with his study group at Jordan's apartment to review their results. Marcus had been nervous about sharing his grade with them, uncertain whether they would see it as just another mark on a page or something that mattered. As he walked into the apartment, Jordan waved him over. "Hey, Marcus. Got your results yet?" Jordan asked, his usual grin plastered on his face. "Yeah," Marcus said, sitting down and pulling out his phone. "I got an A-. Jordan raised an eyebrow. "Nice. That's impressive. You earned it." The rest of the group, sitting around the table with their own exam results, nodded in agreement. There was a look of genuine respect in their eyes, and Marcus felt it deep in his chest. These weren't just classmates anymore. They were friends, people who had seen his growth and were proud of him for it. It felt like a shared victory. "Man, I can't believe we made it through this semester," one of the other students, Laura, said with a smile. "It feels like it was only yesterday we were all trying to figure out that first problem set." "I know," Jordan said, leaning back in his chair. "But we did it. We actually made it through. And we didn't just make it, we dominated." Marcus felt his heart swell with pride. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just a tag-along. He wasn't just a kid from Detroit who had to fight for respect. He was part of a team, and together, they had accomplished something incredible. As the evening wore on, their conversation shifted to the future. "So, what's next for you guys?" Laura asked, looking around the table. "Summer plans? Internships?" Marcus felt a pang of uncertainty. While his peers were talking about potential internships, travel plans, and career moves, he wasn't sure where he fit into that world. Back home, he had never been in a position to think about the future in such grand terms. It always felt like there was more survival than dreaming. "I'm still figuring that out," Marcus admitted. "I'm just trying to keep my head in the game, you know." Jordan nodded in understanding. "We all are, man. But trust me, you're in the right place. You're going places." Marcus didn't respond immediately, his thoughts drifting. He had never been one for dreaming too big, he had always felt like the world around him was too big for him to conquer. But now, for the first time, he felt like the world wasn't just open to him, it was ready to be changed by him. The following weeks were a whirlwind. The end of the semester was approaching quickly, and Marcus spent most of his time preparing for finals in other classes. But there was something different in the way he approached these tasks now. Every exam was a chance to prove himself, not just to his professors or peers, but to the person he had become. Marcus had spent so long living with self-doubt, but now, he was starting to shed that skin, to trust that his hard work could lead to something real. One evening, as he sat in the library studying for an economics exam, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Dr. Stone. "Marcus, I hope this message finds you well. I would like to meet with you tomorrow during office hours. I have something important to discuss regarding your performance this semester." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. What could this be about? Was it a follow-up on his grade? Or something else entirely? The next day, he walked nervously to Dr. Stone's office, his mind racing with possibilities. He knocked and entered without waiting for a reply. "Marcus," Dr. Stone said, smiling as he looked up from a stack of papers. "Good to see you. Please, have a seat." Marcus sat down, his hands gripping the edge of the chair. "What's going on, Professor?" Dr. Stone leaned forward, his expression serious but not unfriendly. "I've been reviewing your work this semester, and I wanted to talk to you about your future here at Georgetown. To be candid, I've been very impressed with your performance. You've come a long way since the beginning of the semester, and I believe you have great potential. Marcus felt his heart race again, this time with a mix of excitement and nervousness. I've been in touch with a few colleagues in the mathematics department, Dr. Stone continued, and I think you might be a strong candidate for a research assistant position next semester. It's a big step, but I think you're ready for it. What do you think? Marcus stared at Dr. Stone in disbelief. Research assistant? This was beyond anything he had expected. He had come to Georgetown with the sole focus of proving to himself that he belonged here. But now, it seemed like the possibilities were opening up before him in ways he had never imagined. Wow, Marcus said, still processing. I don't know what to say. I'm honored. But I don't know if I'm ready. Dr. Stone smiled warmly. That's precisely why I'm offering this opportunity. It's not about being ready right now. It's about potential. And I believe you have a lot of it. Marcus thought about it for a moment. The uncertainty, the self-doubt that had followed him for so long, still lingered, but it was fading. Maybe he wasn't ready in the way he had always thought he needed to be. Maybe, just maybe, the time to take a step forward had finally arrived. I'll take it, Marcus said, his voice firm. I'll do it. Dr. Stone's smile widened. Good. I knew you would. You're going to do great things, Marcus. As Marcus left Dr. Stone's office, a sense of pride swelled inside him. For so long, he had doubted his place in this world, but now, it seemed as if the world was opening up to him. The journey had only just begun. The weeks after Marcus's conversation with Dr. Stone passed by in a blur of anticipation and preparation. The summer was fast approaching, but for Marcus, it felt like a pivot point, a moment when everything he thought he knew about himself, about his future, was about to change. A research assistant position. At the very thought, his mind would race with excitement and fear in equal measure. Could he really handle it? Was he truly ready for the responsibilities that came with it? Each time Marcus sat down to study or work on his assignments, he couldn't shake the nagging questions. Could he measure up to the other students who had been in the field longer? Would they see him as an outsider, someone who didn't belong in the same circles as them? His self-doubt, though quieter than it had been before, still lingered in the background, threatening to consume his confidence. But Dr. Stone's faith in him echoed in his mind, and slowly, Marcus began to accept the possibility that he might just have what it took. The first day of summer research was a strange mix of excitement and overwhelming uncertainty. Marcus found himself walking through the math department's hallways, feeling like a visitor in a world that, until recently, had seemed unattainable. He wasn't just another student in the classroom anymore. He was about to work alongside some of the brightest minds in the field, and the weight of that responsibility didn't hit him until he was standing at the door of the research lab. Taking a deep breath, Marcus knocked lightly. The door opened, and a woman with dark brown hair, wearing a lab coat and glasses, looked up from a stack of papers on the desk. "You must be Marcus," she said with a friendly smile. "I'm Dr. Richards. Welcome to the team." Marcus nodded, trying to maintain his composure. "Thanks for having me." Dr. Richards led him into the lab, which was buzzing with activity. The walls were lined with chalkboards filled with complex equations and mathematical notations. There were several graduate students huddled around computers, and others were discussing theories over papers and textbooks. It was a far cry from the lecture halls and study sessions Marcus was used to, and the atmosphere felt a little intimidating. "Your main task will be helping us with data analysis," Dr. Richards continued, leading Marcus to a workstation. "You'll be assisting with some of the computational work and contributing to the research process. Don't worry if you don't understand everything right away, we're all here to help you." As Marcus sat down in front of the computer, he felt a mixture of excitement and dread. This wasn't just an internship. This wasn't just a way to pass the time in the summer. This was a real opportunity, one that could shape his future, and potentially change the trajectory of his life. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he tried to focus, but the doubt began to creep in. What if he messed up? What if the others realized he didn't belong here? His mind raced through every scenario, each one worse than the last. But then, he took a breath and remembered Dr. Stone's words, "Don't let your fears hold you back." With that in mind, Marcus took his first step. He opened the data set Dr. Richards had given him and started working through it, meticulously reviewing each entry, solving equations, and checking for errors. As time passed, he found a rhythm. His confidence, though still fragile, grew with every task he completed. No, he wasn't perfect. But he was learning, and for the first time in a long time, he was doing it with a sense of purpose. The next few weeks went by quickly, and Marcus became more comfortable in the lab. He worked closely with Dr. Richards and the graduate students, slowly gaining their respect. At first, they treated him with the usual cautious curiosity that people often give to newcomers, but as Marcus proved himself with each passing day, the walls began to come down. He was no longer the new guy in the lab, he was a valued team member. Despite this progress, there was one thing that continued to gnaw at him, the fear that he still wasn't good enough. He found himself comparing his work to that of the graduate students, always feeling like his results were just a little bit less polished. But then, one afternoon, something happened that would change everything. Marcus had been struggling with a particularly difficult problem that involved complex integration and multivariable calculus. He had spent hours on it, poring over the equations and trying to figure out where he was going wrong. Frustration was starting to cloud his focus when Dr. Richards walked by and noticed his struggle. "You're stuck on something," Dr. Richards said, her voice kind but direct. I think so," Marcus admitted, his face flushed with embarrassment. "I've been working on this for a while, but I can't seem to crack it." Dr. Richards stood beside him, glancing over the data. "Let me take a look." She examined the problem for a few moments, and then her eyes widened. "Ah, I see what happened. You've made a mistake in your calculation here. But it's a small mistake, something easily overlooked." Marcus's heart sank. A mistake. He had been staring at the problem for hours and hadn't even realized that. But then, Dr. Richards added something that surprised him. "Don't worry about it," she said. "In fact, this mistake is one that even experienced researchers can make. The key is to recognize it and learn from it. And you just did." Marcus looked at her, confused. "But I failed the calculation." "No," she corrected gently. "You didn't fail. You learned. And that's what matters." The simple reassurance hit Marcus like a tidal wave. He had spent so much time focused on perfection, terrified that any mistake would reveal his inadequacies. But Dr. Richards had just shown him something different, that mistakes weren't something to fear, they were part of the process. They were stepping stones on the path to mastery. In that moment, Marcus's perspective shifted. He wasn't here to be perfect. He was here to learn. And every mistake, every challenge, was an opportunity to improve. It wasn't about being flawless, it was about progressing, growing, and embracing the journey. By the end of the summer, Marcus had grown in ways he never imagined. He wasn't just a student anymore, he was an active participant in groundbreaking research, contributing to real-world projects and learning from some of the brightest minds in the field. The self-doubt that had once consumed him was still there, but it no longer held the same power over him. He had proven, first to himself, then to others, that he had the potential to succeed. As the summer came to a close, Marcus found himself standing at another crossroads. Georgetown had always been the goal, but now, as he looked toward his future, he could see even more possibilities ahead. Graduate school, prestigious internships, even a potential career in academia. The world was no longer a place where he felt like an outsider, it was a place where he could make his mark. And when Dr. Richards called him into her office one last time before the end of the summer, Marcus knew the conversation would change everything once again. The last few days of summer felt like a whirlwind. With research wrapping up and the semester quickly approaching, Marcus found himself caught between excitement and a sense of urgency. He had grown comfortable in his new role as a research assistant, and his confidence had been steadily building. But despite all of the progress, he knew the hardest part was still ahead, the upcoming semester. The phone call from Dr. Richards came unexpectedly. Marcus was in his apartment, packing his things for the new school year, when his phone rang. The number on the screen wasn't one he recognized, but the area code matched Georgetown's. "Hello?" he answered, setting down a pile of textbooks. "Marcus?" "It's Dr. Richards," came the voice on the other end. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." "Not at all, Dr. Richards." "What's up?" "Good. I wanted to talk to you about something important," she said, her tone both professional and warm. "We've been really impressed with your work this summer, and I wanted to offer you something. There's an opportunity to continue your research next semester, but with an added responsibility. I'd like to invite you to collaborate on a new project we're starting. It's a bit more advanced, and we're bringing in a few other departments. We think you're ready for this kind of work. What do you think?" Marcus stood frozen, the phone pressed to his ear. This wasn't just another project. This was the project, the kind of opportunity most students only dreamed of. The kind of thing that could launch his career into an entirely new direction. Wow. I don't know what to say," he finally stammered. "That sounds incredible. What exactly would I be doing?" "Basically," Dr. Richards explained, "we are starting a multidisciplinary project on mathematical modeling and data analysis in relation to climate change. We're combining the fields of applied mathematics, environmental science, and even computer science. I'll be overseeing the mathematical modeling portion, but we'll need someone like you to help bridge the gap between the theoretical and computational aspects. It's going to be challenging, but I have no doubt that you're up to it." Marcus could hardly believe what he was hearing. Climate change. A project that spanned multiple disciplines. It was exactly the kind of cutting-edge work that could propel his academic career to a whole new level. The very idea of contributing to something so important, so vast, made him feel both exhilarated and terrified. But the fear that had once held him back was now being replaced with an undeniable sense of purpose. "I'd be honored," Marcus said, his voice steady with excitement. "I'm in." Dr. Richards chuckled softly. "I knew you'd say yes. You've got the right mindset for this, Marcus. We'll send over the details soon, but I wanted to give you a heads up before the semester kicks off. You'll be working closely with some top experts in these fields, so get ready to push yourself." As soon as the conversation ended, Marcus sat on the edge of his bed, feeling as though his whole world had just expanded. This wasn't just another opportunity, it was the opportunity. An experience that could define the next phase of his life. The first week of the semester felt like a blur. It wasn't just the weight of his coursework, it was the sheer volume of responsibilities he now carried. He was still a student, still a young man trying to find his way in the world, but now he was also part of a project that could change how people viewed mathematical modeling in climate science. Walking through the halls of Georgetown felt different now. It wasn't just a place where he had to fight for respect, it was the place where he belonged. The late-night study sessions, the quiet mornings in the library, all of it felt less like a battle and more like a purpose. And the moments when he encountered his classmates, whether in passing or in the occasional conversation, had a new sense of camaraderie. But there was also something else. A pressure. A constant reminder that he was no longer just keeping up with the class. Now, he was at the forefront of something bigger than himself. With every new task, every new challenge, he could feel the weight of responsibility growing heavier. His old fears resurfaced. Am I really ready for this? Am I good enough to handle this level of work? It didn't help that his research group, consisting of a mix of graduate students, postdocs, and professors, was filled with individuals whose knowledge and experience far exceeded his own. He was the youngest person in the group, and while the others were friendly, there was always that underlying sense of awe. He was still an outsider in their world. The first meeting with the team was a whirlwind. Dr. Richards introduced him to everyone, and Marcus tried his best to remember the names of the professors and students around the room. But as the team dove into the specifics of the project, his nerves began to creep back in. The math was more complex than anything he had ever done. The conversations were filled with technical jargon and references to advanced theories he hadn't encountered in his undergraduate courses. He could feel the weight of his own inadequacy. By the end of the meeting, Marcus felt drained. The new project was far beyond anything he had expected. But he wasn't willing to let his fears control him. If anything, it pushed him harder. He stayed up late that night, reviewing the literature on climate modeling and diving into the theory behind the algorithms they would be using. He couldn't afford to fall behind, not now, not when the stakes were so high. Over the next few weeks, Marcus threw himself into the project with everything he had. He spent hours each day in the lab, dissecting data sets, running complex simulations, and trying to grasp the underlying theories that governed the calculations. It wasn't easy. There were moments when he felt completely overwhelmed, when the pressure of not wanting to disappoint anyone felt like it might crush him. But in those moments, he remembered something Dr. Richards had said during one of their conversations. Don't focus on perfection, Marcus. Focus on progress. Small steps lead to big achievements. And so, Marcus took small steps. Every breakthrough, no matter how small, gave him the confidence to keep moving forward. Slowly, he started to feel more at home in the project. The other researchers began to respect him, not just for his work ethic, but for his ability to contribute meaningful ideas. They started to ask him for his thoughts on different aspects of the project. His self-doubt still lingered, but it had become background noise. It didn't hold the same power over him anymore. One afternoon, a breakthrough came. After weeks of analyzing data and testing different models, Marcus discovered an anomaly, an inconsistency in one of the climate models that had been overlooked by the others. He hesitated at first, unsure if he should bring it up. But then, remembering his promise to himself, he approached Dr. Richards. Dr. Richards, he said, his voice a little shaky but determined. I think I've found something. She raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Go on. Marcus explained the anomaly he had found and walked her through his findings. Dr. Richards listened carefully, her expression unreadable. When he finished, there was a long pause. Then, she nodded. That's a very interesting observation, Marcus. We'll need to look at this more closely, but it could be a significant breakthrough for the project. The weight lifted off his chest. For the first time in his life, Marcus felt like his voice mattered. He wasn't just a student in a sea of experts. He was an expert in his own right, someone who had contributed something valuable. It was a pivotal moment, one that reaffirmed everything he had worked for. As the semester progressed, Marcus's confidence continued to grow. He was no longer just hoping for success, he was actively achieving it. And with every success, his doubts faded a little more. The world that had once seemed so intimidating was now within his grasp, and Marcus realized that this was only the beginning. There was more to come, and he was ready for it. It was a brisk autumn morning when Marcus received the email that would shift the course of his academic career once again. The subject line simply read, Georgetown University, invitation to present at the annual math symposium. Marcus stared at the email for a moment, unsure whether he was reading it correctly. He opened it quickly, his heart pounding with anticipation. Dear Marcus, we are pleased to inform you that your recent work on the climate modeling project has been selected for presentation at the upcoming annual math symposium. Your analysis of the data and the discovery of the anomaly in the climate model was of significant interest to our selection committee. We believe that your research will contribute greatly to the discussions on the future of environmental mathematics. The symposium will take place next month, and we would be honored to have you present your findings to an audience of esteemed faculty, researchers, and industry professionals. Please let us know if you are able to accept this invitation. Warm regards. Dr. Richards. Department of Mathematics, Georgetown University *. Marcus read the email again. And again. He couldn't believe it. He had been invited to present at a major academic symposium. He had only been part of the project for a few months, and yet, his work had earned him this recognition. His first instinct was to doubt himself. Was he truly ready to stand in front of professionals, professors, and industry experts? But then, he reminded himself of the confidence he had built over the past few months. This was his chance to showcase everything he had learned, to prove that he belonged in the same room as the researchers he had once looked up to. He immediately replied to Dr. Richards, accepting the invitation. The email was simple, but his heart raced as he clicked send. For the first time in his life, he was about to put his work, his ideas, on display for the world to see. In the days that followed, Marcus poured every ounce of his energy into preparing for the symposium. He worked with Dr. Richards and the other team members to refine his presentation, rehearsing the key points of his findings and how they fit into the broader context of climate modeling. The more he practiced, the more he realized how much he had grown since joining the research project. He had gone from being the new guy with little experience to a respected team member with original contributions. His presentation would not just be a summary of someone else's work, it would be his work, and it was something he could be proud of. The day before the symposium, Marcus stood in front of the mirror in his apartment, adjusting his suit jacket and smoothing his tie. His reflection stared back at him, and for the first time, he saw a person who looked confident. He wasn't the same young man who had walked into Georgetown just a few years ago, unsure of his place. He had grown, both in his academic abilities and his sense of self. He was ready for this. The symposium took place in a large auditorium on campus, filled with rows of chairs and groups of people chatting eagerly as they gathered before the event began. Marcus stood in the hallway, his palms sweating despite the chill in the air. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This wasn't just another presentation, it was his chance to make an impression, to show everyone that he wasn't just the kid who had been too dumb for math. He was someone with ideas worth hearing. Dr. Richards approached him just before the event started, giving him a reassuring smile. "You've got this, Marcus. You've worked hard, and you're more than ready. Just remember, focus on sharing what you've discovered. These people are here to learn from you." He nodded, though his nerves still churned in his stomach. This was it, the moment that would define his place in the academic world. When it was his turn to present, Marcus walked to the front of the room, heart racing. He stood in front of the large screen displaying his presentation slides, and he faced an audience of over 50 individuals, professors, graduate students, and professionals from across the country. The room fell silent as he began to speak. "Good afternoon, everyone," Marcus said, his voice steady but slightly shaky. "My name is Marcus Turner, and I'm here to present some of the findings from a climate modeling project I've been working on at Georgetown University." He took a deep breath, reminding himself of Dr. Richards's advice. This wasn't about impressing anyone, it was about sharing the work he had done, the insights he had uncovered. As he delved into the details of the data analysis, explaining the anomaly he had discovered in the climate model, Marcus found his rhythm. He spoke with conviction, confidently explaining how his work could improve the accuracy of climate predictions and how the discovery could lead to better policy decisions in the future. For the first time in his life, Marcus wasn't concerned with the fear of failure. He was simply presenting his research, proud of what he had accomplished. As the minutes passed, he began to feel a sense of control. The nerves started to fade, replaced by a calm confidence he didn't even know he had. When he finished, there was a moment of silence. Then, the room erupted into applause. Marcus stood frozen, not sure how to react. He hadn't expected this kind of reception. His heart raced as he looked around the room at the faces of the people who had just heard him present. They were nodding, whispering to each other, clearly impressed by what he had shared. After the applause died down, Dr. Richard stood up and walked over to him, her face beaming with pride. "Well done, Marcus. That was incredible." The rest of the symposium was a blur of conversations and questions, many of them focused on Marcus's research. He found himself talking to several faculty members who expressed genuine interest in his findings and encouraged him to continue pursuing research in the field. One professor even suggested that Marcus consider applying for a postgraduate research position at another university, offering to put him in touch with key contacts. By the time the event ended, Marcus felt like a different person. He had stood in front of some of the most respected minds in the field, and he had delivered a presentation that was well received. The validation, the recognition, it was more than he had ever imagined. As he left the auditorium, Dr. Richards caught up with him. "You did more than just present your research today, Marcus. You made a real impact. I think I speak for everyone here when I say that we're all excited to see where you go next." Walking back to his apartment that evening, Marcus felt a sense of accomplishment he had never experienced before. He had come a long way from the uncertain student who had been doubted by so many. Now, he was being recognized for his work, his ideas, and his contributions. He had proven that he wasn't just too dumb for math. He was smart, capable, and, more importantly, worthy of his place at the table. As the autumn breeze rustled the leaves around him, Marcus couldn't help but feel like this was only the beginning. He had made it this far, but there was still so much more ahead. Whatever came next, he was ready. The exhilaration of the symposium had barely settled before the next wave of challenges arrived. Marcus had expected the attention, the compliments, even the offers of collaboration, but he hadn't expected the new pressure that accompanied them. The following weeks felt like a race, a blur of emails, meetings, and expectations. His academic schedule had intensified, not just because of his coursework, but because of the newfound demands on his time. The symposium had opened doors, but it also meant that his work now had a spotlight on it. People in the department, other students, even professors from different universities were reaching out to him. His research, once confined to a small circle of peers and mentors, was now being seen by a much larger audience. And with that visibility came questions. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone wanted to know more. Everyone expected answers from Marcus. At first, it was flattering. The attention was validation, proof that he had earned his place in the academic world. But as the weeks passed, the demands began to feel suffocating. Late nights were filled with emails and invitations, while early mornings were spent trying to catch up on homework. The balance he had once managed with ease was slipping through his fingers, replaced by an endless stream of requests, questions, and deadlines. The tipping point came late one evening in the library. Marcus had been working for hours on a new model for the climate project, refining the algorithms he had presented at the symposium. His eyes were dry and tired, his back sore from hunched hours at the computer. He'd been at this for weeks now, focusing on his research, attending meetings, and trying to stay on top of his coursework. But as the deadline for a new paper loomed closer, the cracks in his resolve began to show. His mind raced with self-doubt. Was this model really the breakthrough they thought it was, or had he just gotten lucky? Was he really as good as everyone said he was, or was he simply being caught up in a moment of hype? He had always prided himself on being a problem solver, someone who could work through challenges with logic and determination. But now, in the quiet of the library, it felt like the problems were too much, the expectations too high. His phone buzzed on the desk, pulling him out of his spiraling thoughts. It was a message from Dr. Richards. "Marcus, I've reviewed your latest results. They look promising. Let's meet tomorrow to discuss some potential improvements. I think you're on the right track. Stay focused." Her words should have been reassuring. They should have given him the confidence he needed to push through the night and finish his work. But instead, they only deepened his unease. Stay focused. It felt like an instruction he couldn't follow. He was already spread too thin, juggling too many responsibilities, and trying to please too many people. He looked at the clock, 2:43 a.m. He hadn't even begun to study for his midterms, and his thesis wasn't anywhere near completion. Panic began to settle in his chest. What if I fail? What if I'm not enough? The next morning, Marcus dragged himself into Dr. Richards's office, his eyes bloodshot and his mind in a fog. He had barely slept. The weight of everything, the project, the research, the upcoming exams, felt unbearable. As he walked into the office, Dr. Richards looked up from her desk, her usual smile absent. She could tell something was off. "Marcus, you look tired," she said softly, her voice kind. "Everything all right?" Marcus hesitated for a moment before replying. I'm struggling, Dr. Richards. I'm behind on my coursework, I'm trying to finish the research, and the expectations are getting to me. I don't know if I can keep up with all of this. Dar. Richards paused, clearly understanding what he meant. She set down the papers she had been reviewing and gave him her full attention. "Marcus, it's okay to feel overwhelmed. This isn't easy. The work we're doing isn't just challenging, it's a lot of responsibility. But you don't have to do it all at once. You've come so far. Don't lose sight of that. Let's talk about how to break things down. What do you need most right now?" Marcus ran a hand over his face, feeling the weight of his exhaustion. "I just don't know how to handle it all. The research, the papers, the presentations, it's too much. I feel like I'm drowning." Dr. Richards nodded slowly. "It's okay to ask for help. This isn't about proving you can do everything by yourself. You're part of a team, Marcus. You don't have to carry the entire burden alone. We can delegate tasks, prioritize, and make sure you have the support you need. You're not in this alone." The simple truth of her words hit him like a wave. He wasn't alone. He had a team. He had mentors, friends, and resources available to him. But somewhere along the way, he had forgotten that. He had gotten so caught up in proving himself, in striving for perfection, that he had lost sight of the bigger picture. "Maybe I've been pushing too hard," he admitted. "I don't want to let anyone down." "You're not letting anyone down by acknowledging that you need help," Dr. Richards said. "In fact, it shows maturity. It shows that you're learning. And learning to manage your work is just as important as learning the material itself." Her words were a lifeline. Marcus took a deep breath, feeling the knot of tension in his chest loosen ever so slightly. He had been trying to carry everything on his shoulders without asking for help, afraid that reaching out would make him seem weak. But Dr. Richards had just reminded him that it was okay to admit when things were too much. That afternoon, Marcus sat down with his research team, Dr. Richards leading the conversation. They discussed the progress of the project, setting clear goals and deadlines for each member. It became clear that they weren't expecting perfection from him, just consistent effort, steady progress, and communication. They would support him through the tough times, just as he had supported them. For the first time in weeks, Marcus felt a sense of relief. He realized that the pressure he had been feeling was partly self-imposed. He had been trying to live up to the expectations of others, but in doing so, he had forgotten to take care of himself. Now, with a renewed sense of perspective, he knew he could do this. It wouldn't be easy, but it was manageable. And he had people to lean on. The days that followed were still challenging, but Marcus approached them with a new mindset. He delegated tasks when necessary, sought help when he needed it, and focused on making steady progress. Slowly but surely, he began to regain control of his academic life. The anxiety that had clouded his thoughts began to lift. The balance he had once struggled to maintain was starting to feel achievable again. The pressure was still there, but it no longer felt insurmountable. And for the first time in a long while, Marcus realized that he didn't have to be perfect. He just had to keep moving forward, one step at a time. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? As the weeks passed, Marcus continued to balance his academic responsibilities with the growing attention from his research. The weight of the challenge was still there, but he had learned to manage it. His meetings with Dr. Richards were more frequent, but they were productive, focusing on refining his research while ensuring he had the support he needed. Things seemed to be progressing smoothly, but as often happens, life has a way of throwing curveballs when we least expect them. It was a Wednesday afternoon when the email arrived. The subject line was simple but alarming: important update regarding your research. Marcus clicked on the message, feeling a sense of unease settle in his stomach as he opened it. Dear Marcus, I regret to inform you that there has been an issue with your climate modeling results that requires immediate attention. The data analysis you provided has shown some discrepancies when compared to the initial model assumptions. While your work is still valuable, it seems there are inconsistencies that need to be addressed before we can proceed further with the project. I suggest we meet to discuss this as soon as possible. Please let me know when you are available. Sincerely, Dr. Richards *. Marcus stared at the email, his heart sinking. Discrepancies? Inconsistencies? He had been working so hard, convinced that his work was making a meaningful contribution. The idea that something was wrong, that his research might have significant flaws, hit him like a punch to the gut. He quickly responded to Dr. Richards, scheduling a meeting for the following day. But even as he typed the email, his mind raced with doubt. What had gone wrong? Had he miscalculated? Or worse, had he overlooked something critical? The fear of failure, that deep, paralyzing fear that had plagued him in the past, resurfaced with a vengeance. The next day, Marcus walked into Dr. Richards's office with a heavy heart. She was sitting at her desk, reviewing a series of graphs on her computer screen, but when she saw him, she motioned for him to sit. Marcus, thank you for coming so quickly, Dr. Richards said, her tone measured but calm. Let's walk through the results together. She pulled up the data analysis on her screen and began pointing to various graphs and charts, her finger tracing along the lines as she spoke. Now, as you know, we've been working with some initial assumptions about climate variables, and your model deviates from those in a few key areas. These discrepancies aren't small, they could have significant implications for the accuracy of the projections. Marcus felt a lump form in his throat as he looked at the data. He had worked so hard to make sense of the numbers, to piece everything together in a way that felt right. But now, faced with the reality of the errors, he began to doubt everything he had done. I don't understand, Marcus stammered, his voice betraying his anxiety. How could this happen? I thought the model was solid. I thought I had checked everything. Dr. Richards looked at him with a steady gaze. It's not about whether you checked everything, Marcus. It's about how we approach the data. In this field, sometimes, things don't align the way we expect. The assumptions we start with aren't always perfect, and sometimes we have to revisit them. This isn't a failure. It's part of the process. Her words didn't immediately ease his worries, but they did make him stop and think. This wasn't a disaster, it was a setback. A mistake. But mistakes were part of learning. He had been so focused on perfection that he had forgotten the most important lesson he had learned in the past few months: setbacks weren't the end. They were just the beginning of figuring out a new way forward. I understand, Marcus said slowly, his mind working to process the situation. What do we do next? Dr. Richards smiled, her voice warm and encouraging. We go back to the drawing board. We reanalyze the data, we adjust the assumptions, and we test new hypotheses. This is how science works. It's a constant process of refining, questioning, and improving. Marcus nodded, his confidence slowly starting to return. He had made a mistake, but it wasn't the end of the world. He could fix this. And he would. Over the next few weeks, Marcus threw himself into revising his model. He worked late into the night, poring over the data, adjusting variables, and recalculating his projections. At times, it felt like he was back at square one, but each time he hit a roadblock, he learned something new. The frustration that had once made him want to give up slowly transformed into determination. He wasn't going to let this setback define him. He was going to prove to himself that he could overcome it. Throughout this period, Dr. Richards continued to check in, offering guidance and suggestions. She was a constant presence, reminding Marcus that mistakes didn't diminish his abilities, they simply gave him new opportunities to grow. One evening, after weeks of late nights and revisions, Marcus finally reached a breakthrough. He had adjusted the key assumptions in his model, and this time, the data aligned. The results were not only more consistent with the initial assumptions, but they were also showing new insights that could refine the climate projections even further. He felt a surge of excitement as he reviewed the numbers. This was it. The work he had done was now on track, and it was better than it had been before. The setback, which had seemed so insurmountable just a few weeks ago, now felt like a distant memory. Marcus took a deep breath and sent the revised model to Dr. Richards, waiting anxiously for her response. Less than an hour later, he received an email from her. Marcus. I've reviewed the new results, and I'm impressed. The adjustments you've made have significantly improved the model's accuracy, and the insights you've uncovered are incredibly valuable. You've done excellent work. Keep going, this is what research is all about. Well done. He sat back in his chair, staring at the email. The weight that had been pressing on his chest for weeks finally lifted. He had done it. Not perfectly, but he had done it. And that was enough. Later that evening, Marcus took a walk around the campus, the cool night air brushing against his face. He thought about how far he had come. Just a few months ago, he had been overwhelmed, unsure of his place in the academic world. But now, he had faced his fears, worked through his mistakes, and come out the other side stronger and more confident than ever before. As he walked under the bright campus lights, he realized that the true victory wasn't in avoiding mistakes, it was in learning from them and moving forward. And that was exactly what he intended to do. The relief from his recent breakthrough lasted only so long before Marcus found himself back in the thick of it, his research, his coursework, his newfound fame. The triumph of overcoming the setback had given him a brief moment of peace, but the reality of the expectations surrounding him began to creep in once more. Now that the model was solid, now that he had delivered on a promise to Dr. Richards and the team, people from all over were starting to take notice. Invitations to speak at conferences, to guest lecture at other universities, and even offers for collaborative projects began flooding his inbox. While it was gratifying to know that his work had made an impact, the pressure that came with it felt overwhelming. In the hallway of his department, he passed colleagues who now looked at him differently, some with admiration, others with a hint of envy. There were murmurs, quiet conversations that seemed to stop whenever he walked by. Some seemed to genuinely want to collaborate, to learn from him. But others were more focused on the recognition, the potential fame that could come from working with someone who had made such a mark in the field. It was a fine line, and Marcus couldn't help but feel like he was walking a tightrope. It wasn't long before the pressure began to feel like a weight on his shoulders. One evening, as he was reviewing his upcoming speaking schedule, Marcus received a call from his mother. She had been supportive of his academic journey, but she hadn't fully understood the magnitude of his success until she saw the media coverage. The moment she'd seen his name in an article alongside some of the biggest names in his field, she had become both proud and anxious, proud of his accomplishments, but anxious about what it meant for his future. Marcus, I've been hearing a lot about you on the news lately, she said, her voice tinged with concern. Are you handling all of this okay? It sounds like a lot of pressure. Marcus leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. I don't know, Mom. It's a lot. Everyone expects so much now. I feel like I'm being pulled in 100 different directions, and I can't keep up with all the demands. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Then his mother spoke again, her voice softer now, but still firm. Marcus, you've worked so hard to get here. I don't want you to lose sight of what's important. You've always told me that you wanted to make a difference. But you also told me that you wanted to enjoy your life. I don't want you to burn out before you even get started. Please, remember to take care of yourself. You're not just a researcher. You're my son. And I love you. So don't forget to breathe. Her words hit him harder than he expected. He had been so focused on meeting the expectations of others that he had forgotten to listen to the one voice that had always been in his corner, his mother's. The truth was, he didn't know how to say no, how to set boundaries. Every opportunity seemed like the next step to success, and he didn't want to miss out on any of them. But in the process, he was losing touch with what mattered most, his well-being. "Thanks, Mom," he said quietly. "I needed to hear that." They talked for a few more minutes, and as he hung up the phone, Marcus sat back in his chair, thinking. His mother had always been there to remind him of the bigger picture, of what truly mattered. And yet, somewhere along the way, he had let the noise of success drown out her voice. Now, he needed to find a way to bring balance back into his life. The following week, Marcus made a decision. He would scale back on the commitments he had made. He would stop accepting every speaking engagement and every collaboration. Instead, he would focus on what truly mattered, his research, his education, and his personal well-being. He would take time for himself. He would give himself permission to step away when things became too overwhelming. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the right one. That afternoon, Marcus walked into Dr. Richards's office, feeling a new sense of clarity. She looked up from her desk as he entered, her usual welcoming smile in place. "Marcus, good to see you. How's everything going?" Marcus took a deep breath before speaking. "I've been thinking a lot about everything lately. I've been taking on too much, trying to please everyone, and I think it's starting to wear on me. I need to focus more on my research and less on trying to meet everyone's expectations." Dar. Richards leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "I'm glad to hear you say that. It's easy to get caught up in the rush of opportunities, but remember, you can't pour from an empty cup. If you don't take care of yourself, you won't be able to do your best work." He nodded, feeling relieved. "I think I've been so focused on proving myself that I forgot about why I started all of this in the first place. I just want to make a difference. And I can't do that if I'm constantly running on empty." Dr. Richards smiled, her eyes warm with understanding. "Exactly. You don't have to do it all at once. In fact, I think the best thing you can do for your research is to give yourself some space to think. Some space to breathe. Trust me, when you focus on your well-being, the work will follow." For the first time in weeks, Marcus felt the weight on his shoulders begin to lift. It was a relief to acknowledge that he didn't have to be everything to everyone. It was okay to take a step back, to refocus on what was truly important. As the days went by, Marcus started to slow down. He still worked hard, but he also took more time for himself. He spent more time in the library, diving into the research he loved, but he also took evening walks, caught up with old friends, and even started taking weekends off. He was learning to set boundaries, both for his own well-being and for the quality of his work. His mental clarity returned, and with it came a renewed sense of purpose. The weight of expectations hadn't disappeared, but it no longer felt as crushing. He had found a way to manage it, to make it work for him instead of against him. By the time the end of the semester arrived, Marcus was in a better place. He had completed his projects, delivered his presentations, and even managed to take some time off to recharge. He had learned that success wasn't about doing everything at once, it was about balance, about knowing when to push forward and when to step back. And as he walked across the campus, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows on the ground, Marcus realized that this was just the beginning. He had the skills, the resilience, and the perspective to succeed, not just in his research, but in life. With a deep breath, he smiled to himself. It was all coming together. Slowly, but surely. As the semester drew to a close, Marcus felt a sense of accomplishment. He had struck a balance between his research, his personal well-being, and the expectations that came with his growing reputation. But just when he thought he could finally catch his breath, a new challenge appeared on the horizon, a challenge that would push him beyond anything he had yet encountered. It came in the form of an invitation to collaborate with none other than Dr. Jonathan Bennett, a renowned figure in the world of climate science. Dr. Bennett was famous for his groundbreaking work on climate change models, and he had recently heard about Marcus's work. He wanted to collaborate on a major international project, one that could influence global climate policy. Marcus sat back in his chair, staring at the email. The opportunity was massive, potentially life-changing. But as he read through the details, doubt crept in. The project was ambitious, too ambitious. It involved traveling to multiple continents, working with world leaders, and contributing to policy debates. It was a high-profile, high-pressure situation. He had never done anything on this scale before, and he wasn't sure he was ready for it. Later that day, Marcus met with Dr. Richards in her office, hoping to get her perspective. She had been his mentor and guide through many difficult moments, and now, he found himself seeking her advice once again. Dr. Richards, Marcus began, sitting down across from her, I've been invited to join an international climate change project. Dr. Jonathan Bennett is leading it, and he wants me to collaborate on his team. Dr. Richards looked up from her papers, raising an eyebrow. That's incredible, Marcus. Dr. Bennett is a legend in the field. This could be a huge opportunity for you. I know, Marcus said, running a hand through his hair, but it's overwhelming. The project is massive. It involves traveling to different countries, working with people at the highest levels of government, and contributing to real-world climate policy decisions. It's not just academic anymore, it's political. I don't know if I'm ready for something like this. Dr. Richards leaned back in her chair, her eyes thoughtful. It's normal to feel that way. This isn't just a research project, it's a global endeavor. But you've been preparing for this without even realizing it. You've faced setbacks, you've learned to manage pressure, and you've proven yourself capable of handling complex challenges. This could be the next step in your journey, Marcus. The question is, do you want to take it? Marcus felt a wave of uncertainty wash over him. He had always prided himself on being prepared for anything, but this was different. He was stepping into unknown territory, both intellectually and emotionally. The idea of influencing policy, of having a real-world impact, was both exhilarating and terrifying. I'm scared, Dr. Richards, Marcus admitted, his voice quiet. I don't know if I can live up to the expectations, not just of the project, but of everyone watching me now. What if I fail? Dr. Richards's gaze softened, and she leaned forward. Marcus, fear is a natural part of growth. But it's important to remember that failure isn't the end, it's part of the process. You've been proving yourself for years now, and this project is just another step in that journey. If you fail, you learn, and you try again. But if you don't take this opportunity, you might never know what you're capable of. Marcus sat there, taking in her words. He realized that the fear he felt was the same fear he had faced when he first started at university, fear of not being good enough, of not measuring up. And yet, each time, he had pushed through that fear and come out stronger. This project, as daunting as it seemed, was no different. I think you're right, Marcus said, his voice gaining strength. It's a lot. But I can't let fear hold me back. I've come this far by facing challenges head-on, and I need to keep doing that. Dr. Richards smiled, her eyes filled with pride. Exactly. You've got this, Marcus. I believe in you. The decision was made. Marcus would join the project. The following weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. He had to review the project's goals, meet with Dr. Bennett's team, and prepare for the intense travel and meetings that lay ahead. The scope of the project was unlike anything he had ever encountered. He was no longer just a researcher in a lab, he was now a part of a global initiative, a force for change on the world stage. As Marcus boarded the plane to his first destination, an international climate summit in Paris, he couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and nerves. This was it. The moment he had been working toward for years. The moment where everything he had learned, all the setbacks and victories, would come together. The project took him from Paris to Berlin, from London to Jakarta, and then to Rio de Janeiro. Each city was a new chapter in this whirlwind journey. He met with world leaders, policymakers, and top-tier scientists. His days were filled with intense discussions about climate change solutions, and his nights were spent reviewing data and refining models. Throughout it all, Marcus felt the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. This wasn't just about proving himself, it was about making a real difference. And with each passing day, he felt the pressure build. But it wasn't all work. As Marcus traveled the world, he was exposed to the diverse impacts of climate change, devastating floods in Jakarta, droughts in the Brazilian countryside, and the desperate need for solutions in every corner of the globe. Seeing these first-hand experiences brought the urgency of his work into sharper focus. One evening, after a long day of meetings in Rio, Marcus stood on a balcony overlooking the city. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the city's skyline, and he felt a sense of awe wash over him. The world was vast, and the challenges were enormous, but for the first time, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. As the warm breeze blew through his hair, Marcus realized something crucial. He wasn't just a researcher anymore. He was a part of something much bigger. And for the first time in his life, he felt truly connected to the work he was doing. It wasn't going to be easy. The road ahead would be filled with challenges, setbacks, and difficult decisions. But Marcus was ready. He had the strength, the resilience, and the vision to face whatever came his way. The journey was far from over, but it had only just begun. The months flew by faster than Marcus could have imagined. Each day seemed to bring a new challenge, a new piece of the puzzle that was this monumental climate project. But with each success came a greater responsibility, and as he grew more involved, he realized that leadership was a whole different beast than just doing the work. As the project expanded and began gaining more media attention, Marcus found himself increasingly in the spotlight. No longer was he just a bright young scientist quietly working in the background. Now, he was a face of the movement, one of the key members of a global initiative that could alter the course of climate policy forever. This wasn't what he had imagined when he set out on his academic journey. One day, while sitting in a sleek, glass-walled conference room in Washington, D.C., surrounded by diplomats, top scientists, and economic experts, Marcus realized just how far he had come. The discussion was about the next phase of the project, a large-scale plan to influence governments and industries worldwide. Everyone was looking to him for input. The pressure was palpable. "I think Marcus's climate model has the potential to shift the paradigm," said Dr. Jonathan Bennett, who had taken a special interest in Marcus's work. "We're not just predicting changes. We're creating actionable plans, ones that can be implemented on the global scale." As the room fell into silence, all eyes turned toward Marcus. For a brief moment, he felt that familiar surge of anxiety. These were world leaders, experts who had been in the field for decades, and now, they were looking to him to guide their next steps. Marcus took a deep breath. He had been in rooms like this before, but never with so much at stake. He had to remember what got him here, the hard work, the passion for his research, the desire to make a difference. This was the same challenge he had faced when he first walked into the crowded classroom and proved his worth. The stakes were higher, but the principle was the same. "I agree," Marcus began, his voice steady but firm. "We have an opportunity here, not just to predict the future but to shape it. But we must ensure that our models don't just remain theoretical. They need to be practical, actionable. And more than that, they need to be inclusive. Climate change doesn't discriminate, and neither can our solutions. We need to focus on vulnerable communities, those that will be hit hardest by the changes we're predicting." The room erupted into quiet murmurs of agreement. Marcus felt a sense of pride wash over him. His voice had been heard, and his perspective mattered. But at the same time, he couldn't ignore the weight of the responsibility he had just taken on. He wasn't just a scientist now, he was a leader. Over the next few weeks, Marcus's role within the project continued to expand. As the team began to outline concrete policy proposals, Marcus became a central figure in negotiations with international organizations, governmental agencies, and corporate leaders. His days were filled with long meetings, brainstorming sessions, and heated debates about the future of the planet. And with every step forward, the pressure mounted. One evening, as he sat in his hotel room in Berlin, preparing for yet another series of high-stakes meetings, Marcus found himself staring at his phone. He had received a message from his old college friend, Jamal, who had been following his progress closely. "Jamal, man, I've been seeing you everywhere lately. You're about to change the world, huh? Just don't forget where you came from. Stay true to who you are. Let's catch up soon." Marcus couldn't help but smile as he read the message. It was a simple reminder, but one that he needed. Jamal's words were a lifeline back to his roots, back to the person he was before the world started expecting so much from him. Back when it was just about the research, just about making a difference for the people who mattered most to him. For a moment, Marcus allowed himself to think back to those simpler days, before the weight of expectations had become so crushing. Before the fame, the interviews, the endless stream of invitations and requests. Back when his only concern was solving problems, not managing reputations. But then the knock on his door pulled him back to reality. It was his assistant, informing him that the team was ready to begin the evening briefing. Marcus quickly put away his phone, took a deep breath, and prepared himself for what was next. The world was waiting. The next day, the meeting was intense. Global leaders were in attendance, discussing the specifics of how to integrate the climate models into national policies. There were disagreements over the allocation of resources, debates about priorities, and heated discussions about the role of industry in the transition to renewable energy. Marcus spoke up when necessary, but the more time he spent in these rooms, the more he realized the complexities of translating science into action. It wasn't just about knowing the numbers or predicting climate patterns, it was about navigating the political landscape, dealing with vested interests, and understanding the human factor behind every decision. As the meeting wore on, Marcus's mind began to wander. He found himself thinking again about his friends, about his family, and the life he had left behind. He missed the quiet moments in the lab, the sense of clarity that came with doing the work without the constant distractions of diplomacy and policy. Later that evening, as the team gathered for dinner, Dr. Bennett pulled Marcus aside. "Marcus," Dr. Bennett said, his voice low, "I want to talk to you about your role in all of this. You've been incredible, but I need to be honest with you. The pressure is only going to keep increasing. You're one of the faces of this project now. People are looking to you for answers, for guidance. Are you ready for this?" Marcus looked at his mentor, searching for the right words. He had always respected Dr. Bennett, but now, he realized how much of a burden this responsibility really was. He wasn't just part of the project anymore, he was its symbol. "I don't know if I'm ready for all of this," Marcus admitted, the weight of the realization settling in. "But I know that I'm here for a reason. I'm here to make a difference. And no matter how difficult it gets, I can't walk away." Dr. Bennett gave him a reassuring smile. "That's the right mindset. You'll find your way, Marcus. Just don't forget that this work is about the future of the planet. And we can't afford to lose you along the way." That night, as Marcus sat alone in his hotel room, he reflected on the path he had taken. He was far from the same person who had walked into Dr. Richards's office all those years ago, unsure of his place in the academic world. He had grown, evolved, and become a leader. But with that leadership came immense pressure. Yet, as the moonlight streamed through the window, Marcus realized something vital: while the pressure might be heavy, it was also the source of his strength. It drove him to be better, to work harder, and to never settle for mediocrity. He wasn't just representing himself anymore, he was representing a movement, a cause that could change the world. And that was something worth fighting for. As he closed his eyes, the weight of the world felt a little less burdensome. He wasn't alone in this. He had his team, his mentors, and most importantly, the drive to push through the hardest moments. And when the world needed him the most, he would be ready. The exhilaration of leadership was swiftly followed by the weight of expectation, a constant reminder of just how much was riding on Marcus's success. But no one had warned him about the unexpected twists, the setbacks that come with being a part of something so large, so impactful. This was no longer a lab project or an academic pursuit, it was real life, with real consequences. It started with a report, a critical report that questioned the accuracy of some of the models Marcus had helped develop. The report came from an independent group of climate experts, and it wasn't the kind of critique Marcus was used to hearing. These were seasoned scientists, respected by his peers, and they had found flaws in the data Marcus and the team had presented. The email hit Marcus's inbox at 3 a.m. He had been reviewing some notes for a meeting the next day, preparing for a crucial speech about the project's future when the alert flashed across his phone. He opened the message and scrolled through the harshly worded critique. The models, the report argued, overestimated certain variables and underestimated others. The critics were questioning not just the results, but the integrity of the data behind them. At first, Marcus felt his heart sink. The feeling of being back in the classroom, that deep-rooted fear of inadequacy, crept up again. He was used to pushing the boundaries, testing ideas, but this wasn't just a classroom disagreement. This was real-world scrutiny, with the potential to derail everything they had worked so hard for. He immediately forwarded the report to Dr. Bennett, along with a brief message: "We need to discuss this urgently. There's a major flaw in the data." The response came quickly: "Marcus, let's talk in the morning. Get some rest." But Marcus couldn't rest. He sat in the dim light of his hotel room, the glow of his laptop screen the only source of light, trying to piece together what had gone wrong. He had spent so much time perfecting the models, running countless simulations, but now someone was telling him it wasn't good enough. It wasn't just about the science anymore, it was about his credibility. His reputation was on the line, and so was the future of the project. The next morning, Marcus met with Dr. Bennett and the core team in a conference room with walls made of glass, overlooking the bustling city. The air was thick with tension as everyone sat down, Marcus's heart racing. He had a sinking feeling that this was just the beginning of a larger problem. Dr. Bennett opened the meeting with a grave expression. "I've read the report. They're questioning a number of our assumptions, especially the data that forms the foundation of our climate predictions." Marcus jumped in, eager to explain. "The data is sound. I double-checked everything. The issue might be with the model's sensitivity to certain variables, but it's not an inherent flaw. We can tweak it." Dr. Bennett looked at him with concern. "Tweak it? Marcus, they're calling into question the very premise of our work. If we don't address this quickly and effectively, the entire project could lose credibility." The room was silent. The weight of Dr. Bennett's words hit Marcus like a wave. It wasn't just about fine-tuning equations, it was about safeguarding the integrity of their entire mission. Marcus had been so focused on the science, on the technical details, that he hadn't prepared for this level of scrutiny. He hadn't considered the political ramifications, the pushback from rival scientists, or the public's perception of their work. "Okay," Marcus said, swallowing his fear. "I'll review the models again, recheck the data. We can fix this. I'll make sure we have a stronger case to present." Dr. Bennett nodded. "Good. But we need to do more than just fix the models. We need to address the public aspect of this. If these accusations get out of hand, it could damage our reputation beyond repair. We'll have to manage the media, too." The next several days were a blur of long hours in the lab, meetings with the project's PR team, and tense conference calls. Marcus was feeling the strain. The team worked tirelessly to refine the models, ensuring that they addressed every concern raised in the report. They recalibrated the variables, double-checked the assumptions, and ran simulations into the late hours of the night. But as the days wore on, the pressure began to take its toll on Marcus. The constant barrage of questions, the media inquiries, the feeling that everyone was watching his every move. It was becoming overwhelming. For the first time since he'd started this journey, Marcus began to question his own abilities. Was he really cut out for this? Could he fix the damage that had been done? One evening, after another grueling day of work, Marcus found himself standing in front of a mirror, staring at his reflection. His eyes were tired, his shoulders heavy. He hadn't had a good night's sleep in what felt like weeks. The exhaustion was starting to show, but it wasn't just physical. It was mental and emotional. Am I enough? He asked himself quietly. Can I really do this? Just then, his phone buzzed, snapping him out of his reverie. It was a text from Dr. Richards. Marcus, I've been following the news. I know it's tough right now, but don't lose sight of why you're doing this. You have the ability to turn this around. You've always risen to the occasion. Don't let this setback define you. Marcus read the message over and over. It was the encouragement he needed to hear. Dr. Richards had always believed in him, even when he didn't believe in himself. The words brought clarity, reminding him of the bigger picture. This was just one hurdle in a much larger journey. If he gave up now, everything they had worked for would be in vain. He took a deep breath, wiped the exhaustion from his face, and picked up the phone to call Dr. Bennett. They had work to do. The days that followed were a test of Marcus's resolve. With the team's hard work and a renewed sense of purpose, they managed to revalidate the models, correct the flaws pointed out by the critics, and strengthen the data. They presented their findings at a press conference, where Marcus took the stage alongside Dr. Bennett. The world was watching. While there were some valid concerns raised, Marcus explained to the reporters, "We've thoroughly reviewed the data and made the necessary adjustments. Our models are sound, and we remain confident that the climate predictions we've made are accurate. But more importantly, this project is about finding solutions, not just presenting numbers. We are committed to working alongside global leaders to ensure that the future we are forecasting is one we can mitigate through action." The media questions came fast and furious, but Marcus stood his ground, answering each one with clarity and confidence. The critics were not entirely silenced, but the team had done what they could to restore their credibility. It was a victory, but it felt hard-earned. That night, as Marcus returned to his hotel room, he sat down on the bed and let out a long, deep breath. The weight of the past few weeks had lifted slightly, but there was no denying it, they had survived the first real test. And while it had been grueling, Marcus now knew something crucial. Setbacks were inevitable. They didn't define him, they refined him. The journey ahead would still be filled with obstacles, but he was stronger now, more resilient than ever before. And with that realization, he allowed himself to rest, knowing that no matter how tough things got, he would face them head-on. Just as he always had. The phone buzzed incessantly on the desk, its persistent vibration pulling Marcus from the haze of exhaustion that had settled over him. It was a day after the press conference, and although the media's response had been largely positive, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was still amiss. The weight of the climate project was beginning to feel even heavier, and the demands of leadership were more relentless than ever. He sat at his desk in the small office he'd been assigned in Berlin, running his fingers through his hair, trying to clear his mind. He had just finished reviewing a report on the project's upcoming funding phase, and the numbers were still swimming in his head. There were talks of securing multi-billion-dollar funding, but they had to present solid evidence of success and progress in order to gain the support of the international community. And that wasn't going to be easy. Marcus stood up and paced the room, trying to regain some focus. The knock at his door startled him. It was Laura, his project manager, with an urgent look on her face. "Marcus, we need to talk," she said, stepping into the room without waiting for him to invite her. "There's been an issue with the funding proposal. A significant one." Marcus felt the knot in his stomach tighten. "What kind of issue?" Laura handed him a printed document. "The latest investor report. It's not good. Several major donors are pulling out. They're citing concerns over the feasibility of the project and the timeline you proposed. They're worried about the lack of short-term results." Marcus glanced at the paper, his heart sinking as he read through the words. Several large corporations, governments, and even some NGOs had expressed their reluctance to continue funding the project, primarily due to the delayed outcomes of their models. They were looking for more immediate results, something tangible they could show to their stakeholders. The timing couldn't have been worse. The funding they were relying on was essential for the next phase of the climate project. Without it, they risked losing momentum, and potentially the entire initiative. "This is serious," Marcus muttered, rubbing his eyes. "What do we do now?" Laura, ever the pragmatist, didn't sugarcoat the situation. "We need to show them something they can hold in their hands. We need results, data, breakthroughs, something to reassure them. And we need it fast." Marcus felt a surge of panic. The pressure to perform had never felt more intense. He had always known that the road ahead would be challenging, but he hadn't anticipated a crisis this early in the game. This wasn't just about proving the models right anymore. This was about saving the project, and maybe, saving the future of the planet. He swallowed hard and took a deep breath. "We can't afford to fail. We have to get this back on track. I'll call a meeting with the team. Let's figure out what we can do." The team gathered in the conference room that afternoon, all of them looking equally drained after the weeks of long hours. But the mood was different today. There was an air of urgency, an unspoken understanding that this might be their last shot. Dr. Bennett was the first to speak. "Marcus, we all know what's at stake here. We've been through a lot, but this is the real test. If we can't demonstrate tangible results, this project might be over before it even gets started. The funders need something they can see, something they can invest in." Marcus nodded, his mind racing. "I know. But we can't sacrifice the integrity of our research just to appease the funders. We need a solution that aligns with the long-term goals of this project. We need to show them that this is more than just a quick fix." Laura interjected, "I agree, Marcus, but we also need to understand their perspective. They're not interested in waiting 5 years for a breakthrough. They want something actionable. Something they can market." Marcus clenched his fists. This wasn't just about meeting the demands of the funders, it was about staying true to the mission. But the longer he thought about it, the more he realized the challenge they faced. They had to bridge the gap between scientific integrity and real-world impact. The question was, how could they do both? A voice broke through the silence. It was Avery, one of the younger researchers on the team. "What if we focused on smaller, more localized solutions?" she suggested. "Instead of trying to present the entire global model all at once, maybe we can develop targeted pilot programs in smaller regions. We can show immediate impacts in these areas, like increased resilience in coastal cities or faster transitions to renewable energy in specific communities." Marcus's eyes widened as he considered the idea. It was a shift in approach, away from grand global solutions towards something more immediate and pragmatic. But it could work. If they could demonstrate localized success, it might be enough to convince the funders that they were on the right path. "That's brilliant, Avery," Marcus said, feeling a spark of hope. "We can present localized models. Projects that provide visible, short-term results while still adhering to the broader goals of the initiative. We'll show them that our predictions are valid and that our solutions work in real-world conditions." Dr. Bennett nodded in approval. "It's a compromise, but it's one that could save the project. We'll need to move quickly, but we can make this work. Marcus turned to Laura. Let's reach out to the local governments and organizations in the regions we're targeting. We need buy-in from them, and we need data, fast. As the meeting concluded, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. They were still facing a monumental challenge, but now they had a direction. A way to salvage the project and keep the momentum going. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. The team worked tirelessly to implement Avery's idea, setting up pilot programs in vulnerable regions. They reached out to local leaders, experts, and community organizers, securing partnerships to demonstrate the project's potential on a smaller scale. Marcus felt like he was juggling a dozen tasks at once, but there was a sense of optimism in the air. They were making progress. However, as the pilot programs began to take shape, the team encountered another hurdle: skepticism. Local communities were hesitant to buy into the solutions they were proposing. Many had seen similar promises from other initiatives, only to be disappointed when the expected results didn't materialize. Some communities were resistant to change, while others lacked the resources to fully implement the necessary measures. Marcus knew that without the full support of these communities, the entire approach would fall apart. He couldn't afford another setback. One night, after a long day of meetings, Marcus found himself in a local cafe in a coastal city that was part of their pilot program. He was meeting with a group of local environmental leaders to discuss the project. The conversation had been going well, but he could sense the unease in the room. "We've been burned before," one of the community leaders said, his voice tinged with frustration. "These projects always sound good on paper, but when it comes down to it, they never deliver. What makes this time different?" Marcus took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "I understand your concerns. But this project isn't like anything you've seen before. We're not just implementing policies from the top down. We're working with you, not just for you. We're here to build sustainable solutions that you can control. This isn't about short-term fixes, it's about creating lasting change, together." The leaders seemed to soften, but the skepticism was still there. Marcus knew that actions would speak louder than words. He had to show them, not just tell them, that their solutions could work. As the days passed, the pilot programs began to see some early successes. Communities began to embrace the changes, and the initial results showed promise. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. And that was enough. With the success of the localized programs, Marcus and the team were able to secure additional funding, bringing the project back on track. The tipping point had been reached. As he sat down at his desk that evening, reviewing the latest data from the pilot programs, Marcus allowed himself a rare moment of relief. They had faced a crisis, but they had come through stronger. The project was still alive. But Marcus knew this was just one battle in a much larger war. The road ahead would be long, filled with more challenges, more setbacks, and more difficult decisions. But now, he was ready for it. This was just the beginning. The success of the pilot programs had breathed new life into Marcus's climate project, but the relief was fleeting. Just when he thought they were gaining traction, something unexpected happened. An article in a leading scientific journal questioned the underlying assumptions of their models once again. This time, the critique came from an even higher profile source, a renowned scientist with decades of experience in climate research. The article was titled "Rethinking Global Models, a Reality Check," and it focused on the very data that Marcus and his team had worked tirelessly to perfect. The scientist argued that the models, despite being adjusted for regional specificity, still relied too heavily on assumptions that were too broad to be reliable in the long run. The very methodology that Marcus and Dr. Bennett had staked their reputations on was now under fire. Marcus read the article multiple times, each word burning with the weight of doubt. The critique was thorough, and its conclusions were hard to ignore. It suggested that their project, although innovative, was inherently flawed. If they couldn't find a way to address these critiques, the project would once again be on shaky ground. His mind raced, as the room around him seemed to close in. He had barely finished reading the article when his phone rang, a call from Dr. Bennett. His mentor's voice was steady, but Marcus could hear the tension beneath the calm. "Marcus, I just saw the article," Dr. Bennett said, his tone measured. "We need to talk." Marcus didn't hesitate. "I know. I've been going through it, and it's tough. It's going to set us back. It's not just about the science. The critics are going to be relentless," Dr. Bennett replied. "But we can't let it derail us. We need a plan to respond, and we need it fast." Marcus stared out the window, watching the city lights flicker against the dark sky. "I don't know, Bennett. I'm starting to think maybe they're right. Maybe we've been too focused on the models. What if we missed something?" "Marcus, listen to me," Dr. Bennett said, his voice softening. "Doubt is a part of this process. It always has been. But it's how we respond that will determine whether we succeed or fail. You've been through worse before. You've faced challenges no one thought you could overcome. And you came out stronger." "I don't know if I can do this anymore," Marcus admitted, his voice cracking under the weight of his uncertainty. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Dr. Bennett spoke again, his words carrying a quiet strength. "You don't have to do this alone. We've built something incredible, Marcus. But we need to act now. If we don't respond to this criticism with confidence and with solutions, it could all come apart. I believe in you, and I believe in the work we've done. So, we're going to push through this. Together." The words were exactly what Marcus needed to hear, even if he didn't fully believe them yet. He stood up from his desk, determination creeping back into his veins. He wasn't going to give up, not now, not when they had come this far. "I'm in," Marcus said, his voice steadying. "Let's figure this out." The next day, the team gathered in the conference room once again. The mood was tense, but the sense of urgency was palpable. Marcus opened the meeting by addressing the elephant in the room. "We all saw the article. We know what it says. It's a serious critique, and it's going to have an impact. But we're not backing down. We're not going to let this define us," Marcus said, his voice strong, though his hands trembled slightly as he laid out the plan. Dr. Bennett spoke next, reinforcing Marcus's resolve. "We're going to revisit the assumptions that have been questioned. We'll double-check our data, cross-reference it with other sources, and look at the models from every angle. But we also need to be proactive. We'll put out a response, outlining the steps we're taking to ensure the accuracy of our work." Avery, who had been a driving force behind the localized pilot programs, chimed in. "We need to focus on what we've already accomplished. The pilot programs are proof that our models work in real-world conditions. We can't let one article overshadow everything we've done. We'll show them that our solutions are tangible and effective." Laura, the pragmatic project manager, offered her thoughts. "The media is going to pick up on this fast, so we need to control the narrative. We'll need to be strategic with our public response, focusing on the fact that we're addressing the critiques head-on and already making progress." Marcus nodded, his mind spinning with the steps they needed to take. "Okay, so here's the plan. We'll revise our models where necessary, work on refining the assumptions, and prepare a detailed public response. But we'll also do something bold. We'll invite the scientist who wrote the critique to meet with us. We'll ask for a dialogue, an open conversation about the flaws they've identified, but also about the solutions we're working on. It's time to put our cards on the table." Dr. Bennett raised an eyebrow. "You want to meet with them directly?" "Yes," Marcus said, feeling the fire of determination surge within him. "We need to show them that we're not afraid of criticism. We need to show the world that we're committed to getting this right, even if it means admitting where we've gone wrong." The room fell silent as the team processed the boldness of the proposal. But one by one, they nodded in agreement. This was the only way forward. If they could engage with their critics openly and transparently, they would prove that they were in control of the situation. The following weeks were a blur of preparation. The team worked around the clock, revisiting their models and refining their assumptions. They pored over the data, ensuring that the adjustments made sense and that the changes were scientifically sound. Meanwhile, Marcus coordinated with the public relations team to prepare a statement that would address the critiques head-on, while also emphasizing the team's commitment to solving the climate crisis. But perhaps the most challenging part of the process was reaching out to the scientist behind the article. Marcus sent an email, proposing a meeting to discuss the issues raised in the critique and to explore potential solutions. To his surprise, the scientist, Dr. Evelyn Larkin, agreed to meet. The meeting was scheduled at a neutral location, a quiet cafe near the university where Dr. Larkin was based. Marcus, Dr. Bennett, and Laura arrived early, the nerves palpable. This was the moment of truth. If they could engage in a productive dialogue with Dr. Larkin, they could turn the tide in their favor. When Dr. Larkin walked in, Marcus stood to greet her. She was a tall woman in her late 40s, with short, salt-and-pepper hair and an air of no-nonsense professionalism. Her expression was neutral, though there was a glimmer of curiosity in her eyes. "Dr. Larkin, thank you for agreeing to meet with us," Marcus said, extending his hand. She shook it firmly, her grip strong. "I'm not here to make your lives easy, Marcus. But I believe in the importance of dialogue. If your models are as solid as you say they are, then I'll be willing to listen." The conversation began with cautious optimism, but as the minutes passed, Marcus found himself navigating a complex dance of explaining their methods, acknowledging the critiques, and outlining their plans for improvements. Dr. Larkin's questions were tough, but Marcus appreciated the chance to explain the nuances of their work. By the end of the meeting, they had agreed on a path forward, a commitment to further refine the models together, with Dr. Larkin's input. As they left the cafe, Marcus felt a sense of relief he hadn't anticipated. The conversation had been difficult, but productive. For the first time in a long while, he felt like they were making real progress, not just with their science, but with how they were being perceived. It was a strange feeling, the kind of anticipation that always lingered before a big decision. The meeting with Dr. Evelyn Larkin had gone better than Marcus had expected. They had addressed the critique head-on, explored ways to improve the model, and, most importantly, made a commitment to collaborate moving forward. But there was still a long road ahead. The climate project was now at a crossroads. They had successfully handled one challenge, but that didn't mean the storm had passed. Far from it. In fact, Marcus could feel the pressure intensifying as the final phase of their pilot programs neared. The project's fate, his own fate, now rested on whether they could scale up their localized solutions and prove that they weren't just another failed attempt at fixing the world's problems. The next few weeks were critical. The team had worked tirelessly to incorporate the feedback from Dr. Larkin and other experts. Their models were refined, and they had gathered enough data from the pilot programs to show that their localized approaches could make a real, tangible difference. But there was still a looming question: could they replicate these successes on a global scale? Marcus sat in his office late one night, reviewing the final data sets. He could see the pieces falling into place, but the nagging doubt that had plagued him for months still lingered. Would the world embrace these solutions? Would governments, corporations, and communities be willing to change their long-standing practices for something untested and bold? The phone rang, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was Laura. "Marcus, you need to get here. Now," she said, her voice tense. "What's wrong?" Marcus asked, standing up immediately. "I'll explain when you get here." "Just hurry," Laura replied before hanging up. Marcus grabbed his jacket and hurried out of his office, his mind racing. As he walked briskly to the elevator, his thoughts were a jumble of possibilities. Was this about the project? Another setback? He had just started to believe they were on the right track. But something told him that whatever was about to unfold, it was going to be big. When Marcus arrived at the conference room, the tension in the air was palpable. Dr. Bennett, Laura, Avery, and the rest of the team were gathered around a large table, their faces grim. Lara stood by the window, staring out at the skyline, deep in thought. "What's going on?" Marcus asked, his voice more urgent than he intended. Lara turned to face him. "The International Climate Summit is a week away. And there's a twist in the story. One of our biggest partners, a major corporation that pledged significant funding, is backing out. They've pulled their support." Marcus felt a wave of shock wash over him. "What? Why?" "They're citing concerns over the long-term feasibility of our project," Lara explained, pacing now. "They've been in talks with other environmental initiatives, and there's a sense that our model, while promising, isn't scalable enough to justify the investment." Marcus couldn't believe what he was hearing. This was one of the key players in the global climate space. An organization that had not only provided financial backing but had also given them credibility in the eyes of other investors. Losing them now would be a devastating blow. "What do we do?" Marcus asked, his mind racing for solutions. Dr. Bennett spoke, his voice steady but filled with frustration. "We can't afford to panic. Losing them is a setback, but it's not the end. We still have other partners, and the pilot programs are showing real results. We have to keep pushing forward, but we also need to rethink how we're framing the project to these investors." Marcus nodded, but the weight of it all was beginning to sink in. "This is bigger than just our project, isn't it?" he said, looking around the room. "If we don't find a way to keep this momentum going, we'll lose everything we've worked for." Avery, ever the optimist, spoke up. "What if this is actually an opportunity? We've been talking about scaling up. What if we do it on our terms? Show them that the real solution lies in local empowerment, not just grand global solutions. Maybe we need to be bolder with our vision." Lara raised an eyebrow. "Boldness isn't the issue. We've been bold from the start. The question is, can we find a way to get this back on track before the summit?" Marcus stared at the team. He had always prided himself on his ability to navigate through crises, but this felt different. It wasn't just a scientific challenge anymore. It was about winning back trust. It was about proving that they could deliver something real, something tangible. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his thoughts. "We're going to do this," he said, his voice resolute. "We've come this far. We can't give up now." In the following days, the team worked around the clock to revise their presentation for the upcoming climate summit. Marcus knew they had to not only show their successes but also face their critics head-on. They had to prove that the project was scalable, sustainable, and worth the investment. But more importantly, they needed to demonstrate that the solutions they were proposing could actually be implemented in the real world, in the immediate future, not just in some distant ideal. Avery took charge of gathering more localized success stories from the pilot programs, focusing on data that showed measurable, short-term improvements. These stories, she argued, could humanize their work and appeal to the practical needs of investors. They needed to sell not just a scientific model, but a vision of real, grassroots change. Lara coordinated with the communications team, ensuring that the messaging was clear, concise, and, above all, optimistic. They had to inspire confidence in the project's future, while still acknowledging the challenges they had faced. It wasn't just about making the project look flawless, it was about showing that they had the resilience to weather adversity and come out stronger. Meanwhile, Marcus worked closely with Dr. Bennett to refine the project's underlying framework. They knew the models had to be adjusted in certain areas, but they also knew that the science was sound. It was about presenting the research with transparency and integrity, showing that their work was constantly evolving in response to feedback. It wasn't about perfect results, it was about progress. The night before the summit, Marcus stood in front of the large screen in the conference room, reviewing the final presentation. He felt a knot in his stomach. This was it. Everything was riding on this moment. They had worked tirelessly for months, and now they had to convince the world that their project was more than just a dream, it was a necessary step towards saving the planet. Marcus, are you okay? Dr. Bennett's voice broke through his thoughts. Marcus looked over at his mentor. I don't know, Bennett. It's been such a long journey. What if we're not ready? Dr. Bennett smiled, a rare moment of warmth from the usually stoic scientist. You've been ready from the start. Just remember why you started this. It wasn't for the accolades or the funding. It was because you saw a problem, and you wanted to do something about it. Marcus nodded slowly, the weight of those words sinking in. It wasn't about perfection. It was about purpose. They had come this far because they believed in what they were doing. Tomorrow, they would take their message to the world. The climate summit was a whirlwind. The stakes were high, and the pressure Marcus felt could have crushed a lesser person. But he wasn't lesser. He was standing at the front of the room, with his team by his side, presenting the culmination of years of hard work, frustration, and hope. And it was time to see if all of it would pay off. The room was filled with the world's most influential figures in climate policy, business leaders, and innovators. The air was thick with expectation as the summit organizers introduced Marcus and his team to present their breakthrough project. The lights dimmed, and the audience quieted. For a brief moment, Marcus felt as though the entire world was holding its breath. He stood at the podium, the weight of every decision and every sleepless night pressing down on his shoulders. He glanced over at Dr. Bennett and Lara, who gave him supportive nods. They had worked tirelessly to prepare for this moment, and now it was time to deliver. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus began, his voice steady despite the butterflies fluttering in his chest. We stand at the precipice of a new era in climate science. The choices we make today will determine the future we leave for our children, and for generations to come. But these choices must be grounded in reality, solutions that are practical, scalable, and above all, effective. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in. Our project has always been about more than just numbers and data. It's about people. It's about empowering communities to take control of their future and create solutions that fit their unique needs. We've learned a great deal in the past few months, especially from our critics, and we've used that feedback to make our models even stronger. Today, I'm proud to show you the progress we've made. The lights came up as the first slide of their presentation flashed on the screen behind him. Avery stepped forward, clicking the remote to advance the slides, and the room was filled with images of their successful pilot programs, local farmers using sustainable farming practices, schools teaching children about environmental stewardship, urban communities adopting green technologies. The data showed significant reductions in emissions, improvements in energy efficiency, and a profound change in the community's attitudes toward sustainability. This isn't just theoretical, Avery said, her voice confident. These are real results. People are already benefiting from the work we've done. And what we're proposing today is not just a model for climate change, it's a model for change itself. For empowerment. For hope. Marcus nodded in agreement as Lara took over, walking the audience through the adjustments they had made to their models, addressing the critiques head-on. They had worked tirelessly to refine the assumptions, enhance the data's accuracy, and ensure that the models were adaptable to different regions and cultures. We've heard the criticism. We know that our approach is bold, but boldness is necessary in the face of a crisis as urgent as climate change, Lara explained. But we've also made it clear that our models are flexible. They're designed to adapt and evolve. And we are committed to ensuring that we continue to listen, learn, and grow from the feedback we receive. Marcus could see the audience shifting in their seats, some nodding in approval, others still skeptical. But he felt something shift in the room, an openness, a willingness to listen. For the first time in months, he began to feel the weight of doubt lifting. They were connecting. They were being heard. As the presentation wrapped up, Marcus took a deep breath and looked out at the sea of faces before him. The final slide displayed a bold statement. The future of climate change is not in the hands of a few powerful organizations. It is in the hands of each and every one of us. The room erupted into applause. After the presentation, Marcus and his team were swarmed by journalists, scientists, and investors eager to ask questions. For once, the questions were more focused on the potential of the project than the flaws. The media's narrative had shifted. No longer were they questioning the feasibility of the model, they were asking how soon it could be implemented on a global scale. And that was when the real breakthrough came. One of the summit's most influential business leaders, Claire Donovan, CEO of a global energy conglomerate, approached Marcus after the presentation. She was known for her no-nonsense demeanor and her willingness to take calculated risks. She had also been one of the investors who had pulled out of the project earlier in the year. "Marcus," she said, shaking his hand, "I have to admit, I wasn't sure about your project before. But what you've shown today is impressive. The world needs solutions like this, solutions that empower communities and deliver tangible results. I want to talk about how we can get behind this and help you scale it." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," Claire replied, her smile tight but genuine. "Let's sit down in the next few days and figure out how we can partner. I think this is the future of climate action." For a moment, Marcus was speechless. This was the opportunity they had been waiting for, a chance to take their work from pilot programs to full-scale implementation. Claire's involvement could provide the financial and logistical support they needed to reach communities around the world. But it wasn't just the financial backing. It was the validation. The world was starting to believe in their vision. As the summit drew to a close, Marcus sat on the balcony of the conference hall, watching the sunset over the city. The weight of the past few days settled into him, but this time, it felt different. It wasn't the burden of failure that had haunted him in the past. It was the weight of possibility. They had done it. They had turned the tide. He thought back to the beginning, when he had first come up with the idea, when he had been laughed off as too dumb for math. All of that seemed so far away now. The obstacles they had faced, the criticisms they had overcome, and the doubters they had silenced, they had made it through. And now, they were on the verge of something much bigger than themselves. Dr. Bennett joined him on the balcony, a look of quiet satisfaction on his face. "You did it, Marcus," he said, sitting beside him. Marcus smiled, his gaze still fixed on the horizon. "We did it. All of us." As they sat in silence, the weight of the moment sunk in. The future was no longer a question mark. It was a path forward, and Marcus was ready to walk it. Months later, Marcus stood in a bustling community center in a rural part of India, surrounded by local leaders, farmers, and schoolchildren. The project had expanded beyond the United States. They were now working with communities in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, adapting the model to fit local contexts. The results were nothing short of extraordinary. The pilot programs had proven to be just the beginning. With each new partnership, they were not just building sustainable solutions, they were creating a global movement, a movement that was changing the way people thought about climate action. As Marcus looked around at the faces of the people whose lives had been transformed, he realized something profound. This wasn't just about saving the planet. It was about giving people the tools to save themselves. And that, he thought, was worth all the struggle, the doubt, and the obstacles they had faced. The world had changed. And with it, so had he. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?